Hi guys, and welcome to Gentle History for Deep Sleep tonight. You arrived just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of wind. Just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath, and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause, because something here does not quite make sense. And the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Flow straight into the story. You are standing on the high plains of Wyoming in the 1870s, where winter does not arrive politely. It does not knock. It does not ask whether the roof is finished, whether the stove has been blacked and fitted, whether the last sack of flour is tied against mice. It simply gathers itself beyond the horizon, silent and pale, and then comes walking over the open land. The evening around you is already losing its edges. The sky is a wide, low sheet of grey, pressed so close to the earth that it feels as if the clouds might scrape the roof of the cabin ahead. There is no forest to break the wind, no village street with cheerful windows, no tidy lane leading home. There is only space, too much space, really. Modern comfort has trained the mind to enjoy open views, but out here the view looks back at you with absolutely no concern for your feelings. You trudge toward the cabin, boots sinking into old snow that has frozen hard on top and gone sugary beneath. Each step breaks through with a small, dry crunch. The sound is strangely loud because everything else is pulled inward. Even the animals seem to know that something is coming. A horse lifts its head near the rough corral, mane stiff with frost, breath blooming white from its nostrils. A dog stands near the doorway and does not bark. It only watches the northern sky, which is never a comforting review from a dog. The cabin itself sits low against the land, built from logs hauled with effort, patched with mud, straw, and whatever patience the builder still had left after learning that Wyoming wind is an extremely personal critic of carpentry. Smoke pushes from the stovepipe, then flattens almost at once, torn sideways by a gust you can feel before it reaches you. It touches the back of your neck with icy fingers. Your shoulders rise, your jaw tightens. The body understands winter before the mind begins making sensible observations. A mainstream historical truth settles beneath this scene by the 1870s. Wyoming was still a young territory, shaped by railroads, military posts, cattle outfits, mining camps, and scattered homesteads rather than by dense towns. The Union Pacific had crossed southern Wyoming in the late 1860s, and its tracks brought people, goods, news, and ambition. But it did not bring gentleness. Beyond stations and settlements, many families and workers still faced winter in places where help could be miles away. And miles on the plains were not ordinary miles. In a blizzard, 1 mile could stretch into a whole country of blindness. You reach the door and lift the latch. The leather thong is stiff beneath your glove. The door sticks for a moment, swollen or frozen or simply offended by the weather. Then it opens inward, and the room exhales the smell of smoke, wool, old coffee, damp wood, animal hide, and people who have been indoors too long with no realistic plan to improve the ventilation. Inside, the light is low and amber. A stove glows near the centre of the room, not bright enough to comfort the soul completely, but bright enough to convince everyone to praise it, like a minor household saint. Shadows lean across the log walls. A table stands near one side, rough planks worn smooth at the edges. There are pegs for coats, a few tin plates, a coffee pot with a blackened belly, and a bedstead pushed against the wall where quilts rise in uneven layers. Every object seems practical. Nothing is here because it merely looks nice. In the 1870s frontier West, decoration has to earn its floor space. You step farther in, and the warmth reaches your face in patches. One cheek feels the stove, the other feels the draft sliding under the door. This is how sleep will work tonight too, not as a single experience, but as a negotiation. Warm here, cold there, quiet for 1 minute. Then the wall creaks. Then the roof answers. Then the wind begins again. Someone has already set a chair near the stove, and you sit carefully, letting your feet stretch toward the iron box. Your boots steam faintly. The smell is not pleasant, but it is honest. And honesty is very common in cabins where privacy is not. A kettle murmurs. The sound is soft enough to make the room feel inhabited even when no one speaks. Beyond the walls, the first loose grains of snow begin to strike the cabin, faint as sand tossed against hide. You listen. At first it is nothing dramatic. Just a dry brushing along the logs, then a light tapping at the window, then a rush against the roof, sudden and strong, as if something large has dragged its sleeve across the world. The dog outside gives one short bark, changes its mind, and scratches to be let in. Sensible animal. The door opens only long enough for the dog to slip through, bringing with it a swirl of cold air and a few crystals of snow that vanish on the packed earthen floor. Some accounts from frontier winters describe people tying ropes between house and barn so they would not lose their way in whiteout conditions. That detail sounds almost like folklore until you stand here in your imagination and look from the cabin door toward the corral, already fading into grey. The distance is not far. In calm weather, it would take less than a minute. In a blizzard, it could become a trap. There is the quirky frontier tidbit for tonight. Sometimes survival depended not on bravery, not on a heroic gallop through the storm, but on a rope, a mittened hand, and the humility to admit that your own barn might become impossible to find. The room darkens another shade. You notice how early night comes when the sky fills with snow. There is a small window, thick with frost around the edges, and through it the world has become a moving blur. No stars, no moon, no distant lantern from a neighbour. Only white, grey, and the strange brown smear of the corral fence disappearing and returning as the wind shifts. You're not yet trying to sleep. Not exactly. You're preparing to be trapped with sleep as the best available pastime. There is a difference. A person in a warm bedroom chooses sleep. A person in an 1870s Wyoming blizzard accepts sleep in pieces, between chores, worries, noises, and the constant question of whether the fire will last. The stove gives a small metallic tick as it heats and settles. These sounds seems harmless now, almost companionable. Later, when the room is dark and everyone is listening too closely, that same tick may sound like a warning. The mind does that in bad weather. It turns ordinary noises into little dramas. The roof beam complains, and suddenly you are considering structural engineering with absolutely no qualifications. A gust hits the wall, and you become an expert in log construction, mostly through prayer. Scholars still argue whether the greatest hardship of frontier blizzards was the physical cold itself, the isolation it created, or the uncertainty that made every decision feel heavier. Should you bring in more fuel now or save strength? Should you check the animals or wait? Should you sleep while you can, or stay awake in case the stove needs tending? These are not grand questions in a history book. They are small questions, which is exactly why they matter. Most survival happens at the scale of small decisions. You remove your outer coat and feel the cold trapped in its seams. Snow melts in tiny beads along the cuffs. Your fingers ache as feeling returns. The room smells more strongly now of coal smoke and hot iron, mixed with the sour wool scent of wet clothing. Outside, the wind rises into a long, hollow note, sliding over the chimney and under the eaves. It does not sound angry. Anger would be easier, somehow. It sounds patient. That patience is what unsettles you. The blizzard is not in a hurry. It can spend all night finding the weaknesses in the door, the roof, the window frame, the barn wall, your blanket, your courage. It can cover paths while you blink. It can bury tracks, silence roads, and turn familiar ground into a soft white surface with no memory. And still, inside the cabin, ordinary life continues because ordinary life is stubborn. Someone pours coffee. Someone adds another piece of fuel to the stove. Someone shakes snow from the dog's coat and mutters that at least one creature in this household has sense enough to come indoors. The joke is small, but it warms the room almost as much as the fire. You look toward the bed, then toward the window, then back to the stove. Night has not fully arrived, yet already you understand that sleep here will not be a simple descent. It will be a careful crossing. You will have to pass through wind, cold, worry, smoke, animal sounds, and the strange awareness that the world beyond the walls has vanished. For now, you sit close to the stove and listen as the first true gust strikes the cabin hard enough to make the door tremble in its frame. The flame inside the stove flickers, the dog lifts its head, the window whitens, and the long Wyoming night begins gathering itself around you. The first lesson of the cabin is that walls are not the same thing as shelter. You understand this slowly, while the storm leans harder against the room and the warm air begins showing you all the places where it can escape. A thin white line of frost gathers along the doorframe. The window glimmers at its corners. Between two logs, where the chinking has cracked and dried, a thread of cold air slips through with the precision of a needle. It touches your wrist, then your neck, then the small space behind your ear, which seems unfairly specific. You shift closer to the stove, but the cabin has already become a map of invisible currents. Warmth rises and pools near the rafters, where nobody is sleeping unless they are a very optimistic spider. Cold settles near the floor, where your feet live. Between the two, the air moves in little restless streams, carrying smoke scent, damp wool, and the faint mineral smell of snow driven against earth and timber. The logs look solid in the firelight. They are thick, dark, and rough, with bark scars and axe marks still visible, yet every seam has a personality. Some seams hold, some whisper, some produce a delicate whistle whenever the wind changes direction, as if the cabin has decided to learn music at the least convenient moment possible. You run your gloved fingers along one gap and feel the draft breathe through. The chinking is a mixture of mud, straw, clay, sometimes lime if a household had access to it, and whatever else could be pressed into service before winter arrived. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly into that cold little seam. Many frontier cabins in the American West relied on locally gathered materials and hand labour, so their comfort depended less on formal design than on how well families could seal, patch, and maintain them through weather that tested everything. A cabin was not finished when it was built. It was finished again and again, every time someone stuffed a rag into a crack, slapped mud into a seam, or nailed a scrap board where the wind had found an opinion. Outside, the blizzard thickens. You cannot see it now except through the small window, where snow lashes past in pale streaks, but you can feel it in the cabin's bones. The roof gives a low creak. The door trembles gently against its latch. A hanging pan ticks against the wall with each stronger gust. The dog has settled beneath the table, nose tucked near its paws, but one ear remains raised. Sensible again. The dog does not trust architecture. Someone presses a rolled blanket against the base of the door. The effect is immediate and also disappointing, which is a common pairing in frontier home improvement. The strongest draught softens, but three smaller draughts reveal themselves, like cold little assistants stepping forward to continue the work. You begin to appreciate why people spoke of weather as though it had intention. It is hard not to personalize a wind that seems to keep notes. The candle on the table bends whenever air slips through the room. Its flame leans, straightens, leans again. Shadows of cups and hands move across the wall in slow, wavering shapes. The cabin is not silent. It is full of tiny sounds, each one magnified by darkness and waiting. The rub of wool, the scrape of a chair leg, the faint hiss of snow entering somewhere too small to see, the breathing of people who are trying not to admit how much they are listening. You place your palm against the inside of the door. The wood is cold enough to sting. On the other side, winter is pressing its whole body against the boards. You imagine the outside surface glazed with frost, the latch crusted, the threshold slowly gathering drifted snow. The door is not only an entrance now, or it is a contested border, and this is before bedtime. That is the small cruelty of trying to sleep in such a place. The body wants darkness, warmth, and repetition. The blizzard offers darkness, cold, and variety. Every gust has a slightly different voice. One strikes the wall flat and blunt. Another curls under the eaves with a moan. Another rattles the window, then vanishes so suddenly that the silence afterward feels staged. A lesser-known bit of frontier life comes drifting in with the cold. Some households used old newspapers, flour sacks, bits of worn clothing, or even pasted layers of paper to reduce drafts around walls and windows. It sounds almost cozy until you remember that paper is not magic, and Wyoming wind in the 1870s was not easily impressed by yesterday's newspaper. Still, imagine lying in bed while scraps of distant news, advertisements, and political arguments helped keep your toes from freezing. Very dignified, very democratic, also probably itchy. You look toward the bed again. It stands against the wall because every cabin must choose between convenience and cruelty, and sometimes the wall wins. The bed may be away from the door, but no place is truly away from the wind. The quilts are stacked high, lumpy and inviting in the way only heavy bedding can be inviting. Yet you already know that once you crawl beneath them, your face will remain exposed to the room. One cheek will cool. Your nose will become a small, independent weather station. You may pull the blanket higher, but then your breath will dampen the cloth, and dampness is winter's patient accomplice. The stove glows with a deeper red as fuel catches. For a moment, warmth grows stronger. Faces soften, shoulders drop. The room exhales. Someone says the worst may pass north of you. Nobody answers too quickly, because the wind chooses that exact moment to strike the cabin so hard that fine dust sifts from between the logs. It falls in a soft line near the wall, catching the light like grey powder. There is your thin layer of ash again, not the strange ash of the opening dream, but hearth ash, old soot, dust, and the dry remains of patchwork living. It settles quietly. You brush it from your sleeve. The gesture feels familiar already. Researchers continue to debate whether frontier memoirs exaggerated cabin discomfort for dramatic effect, or whether later generations softened the memory because hardship became part of family pride. The truth probably sits somewhere in the draft itself. Some cabins were better built. Some nights were milder. Some families had more blankets, better stoves, tighter doors, and neighbours close enough to matter. But when a northern blizzard crossed the high plains, even a good cabin could feel temporary. Even a strong wall could seem thin. You notice the smell changing as the room tightens against the storm. Smoke lingers lower than before. Wet mittens near the stove release a sour, sheepy odour. The dog smells like snow and old hay. Human warmth adds itself to the air, humble and necessary. No one opens the door unless there is a reason. Fresh air has become too expensive. A gust pushes through one hidden crack and blows across the back of your hands. You tuck them under your arms. The movement is instinctive, ancient, and not especially graceful. Around you, everyone makes similar adjustments. A shawl pulled tighter, a chair angled closer to heat, a boot nudged away from the coldest floorboards. Comfort is not achieved. It is assembled. The window has gone nearly opaque with frost, but at the centre there remains a small uneven clearing, made by the heat within. Through it you see nothing but flying white. The world outside has lost depth. The yard, the corral, the path, the horizon, all erased. The cabin has become the whole known universe, and the universe has drafts. You breathe slowly and try to let the sounds become ordinary. The hiss along the wall, the low complaint of timber, the stove's iron ticking, the small movements of people preparing not for restful sleep exactly, but for the frontier version of rest, which is sleep with one ear open and one hand aware of the blanket edge. The wind finds every crack, yes, but for now so do you. You learn where the cold enters. You learn where the warmth gathers. You learn which sounds mean danger and which simply mean a rough cabin surviving another hour. Outside, the storm continues its patient inspection. Inside, you sit among smoke, wool, lamplight, and breathing, waiting for the room to become familiar enough that sleep may risk entering too. The stove becomes the sun because nothing else in the room has that kind of authority. You feel it before you look at it. Heat pushes from the iron body in slow waves, stronger near the front, weaker near the sides, almost absent near the floor where your boots still remember the snow. The stove is black, squat, practical, and slightly temperamental, which makes it one of the more believable personalities in the cabin. It does not glow with kindness, it glows with conditions. Feed me correctly, it says, and perhaps everyone keeps their toes. The fire inside shifts and collapses with a soft inward sigh. A seam of orange light appears along the stove door. Then it vanishes. The iron ticks again, expanding in tiny adjustments, each sound precise and patient. You have heard clocks less important than this. In a blizzard night, time is measured less by hours than by fuel. How long since the last piece went in, how much remains by the wall. How cold will the room become before someone must rise again? You sit close enough for your shins to warm almost too much. The front of you softens. Your back still feels the cabin's draughts roaming like curious hands. This is the strange geography of frontier heat. One side of the body lives in July. The other side files a formal complaint from January. A common historical fact settles beside the stove by the late 19th century. Cast iron stoves had become central to many American homes, including frontier cabins, because they used fuel more efficiently than open hearths and could provide cooking heat as well as room warmth. That sounds simple, perhaps even boring, until you imagine the alternative. An open fireplace can be beautiful, yes, very charming in paintings, very romantic in holiday cards, and very eager to send most of its heat up the chimney like a wealthy uncle leaving early. A stove keeps more heat inside the room, and in Wyoming weather, that difference could decide whether sleep was possible at all. Someone lifts the stove lid with a hook. A red breath escapes, carrying sparks and the dry mineral smell of burning coal mixed with wood smoke. The room brightens for one moment, revealing faces, wall seams, hanging clothes, the dog's open eye beneath the table, and a line of ash dust near the hearth. Then the lid settles back into place, and the cabin returns to its low amber hush. Fuel is stacked near the wall, but not enough to make anyone cheerful. A few pieces of split wood, a scuttle of coal if the household is lucky, brought by rail or wagon, and guarded with the seriousness normally reserved for family silver. On some nights, dried animal dung could be burned where wood was scarce, especially across open prairie country. There is the small odd detail for the evening travellers and settlers sometimes use buffalo chips or cattle chips as fuel, and although that may not sound like the cosiest bedtime accessory, it could burn surprisingly well when dry. History is full of humble technologies that never make it into grand statues. No one builds a monument to the emergency cow chip, but perhaps someone should at least nod respectfully. The stove's warmth changes the cabin's mood. People speak more quietly near it, as if the iron might be listening. A hand reaches out to warm stiff fingers. A sock hangs from a chair back, steaming faintly. A kettle begins a low murmur that feels almost like a lullaby, though not one written by anyone with indoor plumbing. You watch the steam gather beneath the lid and imagine hot water poured into a cup. A basin, maybe over coffee grounds already used once and still expected to perform. Frontier coffee is not always a beverage so much as a moral position. It is dark, bitter, hot, and unlikely to apologize. Tonight, it helps keep someone awake enough to tend the stove, which means it is doing holy work. The storm outside strikes again, and the stovepipe trembles where it passes upward. You hear a faint flutter in the draught, a change in the fire's breath. A poor chimney drawer could fill a room with smoke. Too strong a draught could burn fuel quickly. Too weak, and the fire sulks. The stove needs attention, like a small iron animal with an appetite and a mood. You begin to understand that sleeping beside it is not as simple as being warm. You must sleep in relation to it. Too close, and your face dries, your skin tightens, your blanket edge grows dangerously warm, and you wake thirsty with a sensation that your eyebrows have been politely threatened. Too far away, and the cold claims your feet first, then your knees, then your patience. The best place is a compromise, and compromises are always crowded. In this cabin, the stove orders the furniture. Chairs angle toward it. Boots gather near it. Damp mittens compete for space around it. Food waits beside it. Children, if there are children, drift near it like sleepy planets. Even the dog understands the arrangement and has placed itself precisely where crumbs, warmth, and human sympathy are most likely to fall. Some historians remain divided over how much frontier families depended on purchased manufactured goods compared with improvised local solutions. The stove sits at the centre of that discussion quite comfortably, radiating evidence. It is a factory-made object, heavy, expensive, and difficult to transport, yet once it reaches a remote cabin, it becomes part of everyday survival so completely that it feels almost native to the room. The frontier was not only axes, horses, and raw wilderness. It was also rail shipments, mail-order dreams, iron castings, repair parts, freight bills, and the constant hope that the thing you bought far away would not crack at the worst possible moment. The fire settles lower. Someone notices before anyone says it. That is how trained the ears become. Conversation fades, and a figure rises to add fuel. The stove door opens with a small metallic complaint. Orange light spills over the floor. A piece of wood slides in. Then another. The flames lick upward, uncertain at first, then more confident. The door closes. Warmth returns slowly, not as a blanket, but as a promise being renewed. You think of the bed waiting along the wall, later, When the lamp is turned down and the cabin grows darker, this stove will remain the last bright presence. Its glow may show through small cracks around the door. Its ticking will continue after voices stop. It will become the thing you listen for when sleep thins. If the ticking slows, if the heat fades, if the room's cold deepens too quickly, someone must wake. That is the bargain. The stove allows sleep, but it also interrupts it. It gives comfort, but only if fed. It steadies the room, but never fully lets anyone forget the storm. You cannot simply surrender to the night because the fire cannot tend itself. Modern bedrooms hide their machinery. Heat arrives from vents, pipes, wires, quiet systems somewhere beyond thought. Here, heat has a mouth, heat has a door, heat has ash beneath it and a handle too hot to touch. The kettle trembles, the dog sighs. Snow whispers against the window in long pale strokes. The room smells of iron, soot, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of warming wood. You lean back and let your eyelids grow heavy for the first time, not because the storm has weakened, but because the stove has made a small circle of trust inside it. Beyond that circle, the cabin remains cold. Beyond the cabin, the planes are lost in white motion. But here, for this moment, the iron sun burns low and steady, and every tired body in the room turns quietly toward it. You begin to understand the bedding before you ever climb into it. It waits along the wall in a great uneven mound, not graceful, not delicate, not the sort of bed a furniture catalogue would admire with soft piano music playing in the background. It is practical bedding, frontier bedding, bedding with a job to do. Quilts lie over blankets. Blankets lie over robes. Coats have been folded near the foot in case the night grows crueler. A shawl rests across one corner. Everything looks heavy, worn, and faintly smoky. Which is to say, everything looks trustworthy. The stove still burns in the centre of the room, but its warmth does not reach evenly. You have already learned that. The bed sits close enough to benefit from the heat, yet far enough from sparks and iron that no one has to wake up because the blankets have decided to become a weather event of their own. The wall behind it is cold. The floor below it is colder. The air above it stirs whenever the wind finds another crack in the logs. So the bedding is not decoration. It is a small fortress. You touch the top quilt. The fabric is rough from use, patched in places, faded in others, and slightly stiff from years of washing that never quite removes smoke, grease, dust, and winter. Under it lies a wool blanket, dense and scratchy enough to remind you that softness was not always the main goal of comfort. Beneath that, perhaps a buffalo robe, hair side inward, its weight thick and grounding. The robe smells faintly animal, earthy and old, even after long use. It is not unpleasant exactly. It is simply honest in a way modern bedding rarely dares to be. A well-established detail of 19th century plains life rests beneath your hand. Buffalo robes were widely used across the Great Plains for warmth during travel and in homes, valued by indigenous peoples, traders, soldiers, ranchers, and settlers before commercial hunting devastated bison herds. In the 1870s, such robes could still be part of the material world of Wyoming, though already shadowed by the rapid destruction of the great herds. That thought gives the bedding a deeper quiet. It is not just warm, it carries a whole landscape inside it. You sit on the edge and feel the mattress shift. It may be stuffed with straw, hay, corn husks, feathers if a household is fortunate, or whatever material could be gathered, traded, carried, and endured. A straw tick has a special talent for sounding alive when you move. It rustles beneath you with dry, secretive whispers, as if the bed has opinions about your weight, but is too polite to state them plainly. You remove your boots slowly, and this is not a simple act. Cold leather resists. Damp socks cling. Your toes ache as air touches them, then ache again as they begin to warm. You rub one foot with both hands, feeling the skin prickle and sting. The floor under your heel is hard-packed earth or rough boards, and either way, it has no sympathy. You tuck your feet quickly beneath the edge of the blanket and discover that the bedding is cold at first. Of course it is. A bed in a cold cabin does not greet you with warmth. It must be persuaded. Your body becomes the first offering. You slide in carefully, pulling layers over your shoulders, and the weight settles down with surprising force. The quilts press your arms. The robe pins your legs. Your breathing becomes slower, partly from comfort and partly because the bedding seems to have decided you're now a parcel. There is a strange peace in the heaviness. Modern blankets often try to feel airy, cloud-like, barely there. This bedding is very much there. It makes itself known. It tells you that you're still in the room, still beside the stove, still inside a storm, but also held. The weight dulls the drafts. The scratch of wool fades as your skin warms it. The smell of smoke rises around your face, mixed with linen, hide, dust, and the faint sourness of human sleep. A small, curious fact drifts in with the warmth people sometimes warmed beds with heated stones, bricks or metal bed warmers before climbing in. A brick heated near the stove and wrapped in cloth could be placed near the feet, becoming a humble little furnace under the covers. Very elegant, not especially. Better than presenting your toes to a frozen mattress like an offering to the frost. Absolutely. Tonight, someone has placed a wrapped stone near the foot of the bed. You find it with your toes and nearly sigh aloud. The heat is gentle now, not burning, just steady. It gathers around your feet and makes the rest of the room seem slightly less unreasonable. You curl around the warmth instinctively. There is nothing dramatic about this comfort, which is exactly why it feels so precious. The storm presses against the cabin. Snow strikes the wall in soft bursts, then pauses, then returns harder. The wind moves over the roof with a long, low rush. Beneath the blankets, the sounds become muffled. The room narrows to breath, fabric, heat, and the occasional glow from the stove door. You can still hear the others moving quietly. Someone folds a coat. Someone stirs the fire. Someone whispers a reminder not to let the dog onto the bed. A rule the dog appears to consider deeply and reject in principle. You smile into the dark on a night like this. Sleeping arrangements are less about privacy and more about survival. People share warmth. Children may be tucked close together. A parent may sleep lightly near the outer edge, rising when the stove needs attention. A traveller may be given floor space near the hearth, rolled in a blanket and grateful for anything between his ribs and the wind. The idea of one person, one bedroom, one carefully chosen pillow belongs to a different world. Here, warmth is communal, space is negotiated, the body is practical. Some scholars continue to question how frontier accounts balance hardship with nostalgia, especially when later writers remembered cabin nights as both miserable and beloved. Was the heavy bedding a symbol of poverty, resilience, family closeness, or all of those at once? The answer changes depending on who is speaking. A child might remember the warm nest of quilts. A mother might remember waking repeatedly to tuck in small shoulders. A hired hand might remember the floor, the smoke, and the dog taking the better spot. You shift under the blankets and find the cold wall with your elbow. A shock moves through the fabric. You pull inward again. The bed is warm only where life has occupied it. Beyond your knees, near the edge, the cold still waits. The frontier bed is not a place where you sprawl carelessly. It teaches compactness. Knees bend, hands fold close. The body makes itself smaller, conserving warmth the way the household conserves flour, coffee, and fuel. Your breath clouds faintly above the covers. If you pull the quilt over your mouth, the air warms quickly, but the fabric dampens with each exhale. You lower it again. Your nose grows cold. This is apparently the treaty. Warm body, cold nose. Acceptable term, though not generous. The stove ticks in the darkness. The wrapped stone cools slowly under your feet. Outside, the wind drifts snow against the walls and smooths the yard into silence. The bedding grows warmer by degrees, and with every degree your thoughts loosen. You remember the rope to the barn, the drafts in the wall, the iron stove holding court in the room. All of it remains close, but softer now, wrapped in wool and smoke. You are not comfortable in the modern sense. You are frontier comfortable. That means you are warm enough to stop shivering. It means your feet have feeling. It means the roof still holds. The stove still breathes. And the blankets are heavy enough to convince your body that rest may be worth attempting. The plains continue their long white roaring beyond the logs, but under the quilts, beneath the robe, beside the cooling stone, you begin to sink towards sleep. Not deeply yet, not safely enough to forget, but enough to let the storm move one layer farther away. The dog reaches the bed before sleep does. You feel the shift first, a careful pressure near your feet, followed by the soft circle of an animal turning once, twice, then settling with complete confidence that this arrangement was always intended. No one invited the dog. No one is surprised. In a blizzard, even rules curl closer to warmth. The cabin has grown darker now. The lamp is turned low, and the stove gives most of the light, pulsing softly through its vents. Under the quilts, your body is beginning to gather heat, but your ears remain awake. They follow every sound outside, every movement inside, every small reminder that humans are not the only creatures trying to pass the night beneath this weather. Beyond the wall, the horse shifts in the corral or shed. You hear it only faintly at first, a dull thump carried through wind and timber, then another, a hoof striking packed ground. A chain or latch touches wood with a small metallic clink. The animal is restless, feeling the storm in its bones, smelling snow, perhaps turning its body away from the worst gusts. Horses have their own opinions about blizzards, and most of them are sensible. You imagine the corral in the whitening dark. The fence rails are crusted with snow. The posts stand half blurred. If there is a lean to shelter, its shadow is already filling with drift. A horse lowers its head, lashes crusted, breath steaming, ribs expanding beneath a winter coat. It knows where the feed should be. It knows where the people are. It does not know why the sky has become a wall of moving ice. A plain truth of life in 1870s Wyoming rests in that sound. Outside livestock were not background scenery. Horses, oxen, milk cows, chickens, pigs, and later larger cattle herds could mean transport, food, income, labour, and survival, especially where markets and neighbours were distant. A family might endure a cold night hungry and tired, but losing an animal could shape weeks, months, even a whole season. So sleep never belongs only to the people in the bed. It belongs to whatever is tied outside, shut in the shed, huddled under straw, or scratching near the hearth. Another gust presses snow against the cabin. The dog lifts its head from the blankets and listens. You can feel its body tense. Then, hearing no immediate disaster, it gives a deep sigh and returns its chin to your ankle. This is comforting and slightly insulting. The dog has assessed the threat and decided your feet are more urgent. Near the stove, a small wooden crate holds a few hens brought inside because the weather has become too sharp for the coop. They shift and mutter under a cloth cover, giving soft, irritated sounds whenever the cabin trembles. Chickens are not famous for dignity in crisis. They are also not famous for emotional support, unless you count the steady reminder that someone, somewhere, is having a more ridiculous night than you are. There is a curious little detail from many cold frontier households. Animals were sometimes brought into human living spaces during severe weather, not from sentiment alone, though affection certainly existed, but because a dead hen, frozen lamb, or chilled calf could mean a real loss. A chicken under the table may not be the dream of refined domestic life, but neither is waking to find the egg supply has become a tragedy. History is rarely as tidy as museum rooms suggest. Sometimes it clucks beneath a blanket near the stove. The smell of the cabin changes with the animals inside. Smoke and wool remain, but now there is dog breath, damp fur, straw, feathers, and the faint barnyard edge that no amount of frontier optimism can rename. The air is warmest near the stove, thickest near the bedding, sharpest near the door. Every breath is a little inventory of survival. You hear another sound from outside, lower and farther away. Cattle, perhaps. A rough bellow thinned by wind. Or maybe only the storm dragging itself across a fence line. The difference matters, and yet from the bed it becomes hard to tell. You listen again. Nothing. Then a moan crosses the roof, long and hollow, and the dog growls softly, mostly for form. Someone rises from a chair near the stove. The floor creaks. A blanket is drawn around shoulders. The person stands still, listening in the same way you are, only with more responsibility. There is the pause all frontier nights know well. Should anyone go out, is the horse in trouble? Has the gate opened? Has a drift blocked the shed? Is that sound real enough to deserve boots, coat, lantern, rope, and the risk of losing the cabin door in blowing snow? No one moves at first. Then the sound does not return. The figure lowers back into the chair. In that quiet decision, you feel the weight of animal care on the frontier. People who lived with livestock knew the difference between ordinary restlessness and panic. They also knew that every trip outdoors in a blizzard spent strength and heat. Courage, out here, is not always rushing into the storm. Sometimes it's waiting long enough to know whether the storm is tricking you. Writers of Western history still disagree about how to interpret the relationship between settlers and their animals during these winters. Were animals mostly tools of survival, sources of labour and food measured by hard necessity? Or did companionship and emotional attachment play a larger role than practical records reveal? The answer likely changes from household to household. A milk cow can be both an economic asset and a familiar presence with a name. A horse can be transport, status, hope, and a creature whose breathing in the dark keeps loneliness from growing too large. A dog can be guard, hunter, nuisance, foot warmer, and self-appointed moral supervisor. The dog at your feet twitches in sleep. Perhaps it dreams of rabbits. Perhaps it dreams of summer. Perhaps it dreams of a cabin where people stop pretending it is not allowed on the bed. Its paw presses once against your shin, then relaxes. The small warmth of that living weight travels through the bedding. You do not object. Outside, the horse stamps again. This time the sound is steadier, less distressed, a shifting body, a restless night. Snow scrapes along the wall in dry waves. Somewhere above, in the roof thatch or rough boards, tiny particles of frost loosen and fall. The stove answers with a faint iron tick. You imagine the chickens under their cloth, eyes closed, feet tucked, feathers puffed. You imagine a milk cow in a shed, chewing slowly if hay remains within reach. You imagine cattle farther out on open range, turning tail to the wind, drifting with the storm if fences fail, their dark bodies becoming shadows in a white world. The 1870s in Wyoming are already moving toward the great cattle era, when herds and ranches will reshape the territory. But tonight, from this bed, the grand story of ranching is not grand at all. It's a sound outside the wall, and a question no one wants to answer in the dark. Your own sleep comes closer, then backs away when the hens rustle, comes closer again, then pauses when the dog growls at nothing, comes closer once more as the horse quiets and the stove steadies. You begin to understand that rest in a blizzard is shared among species, human bodies, animal bodies, all gathered around heat, all waiting for morning, all listening through walls that feel too thin. The bedding grows warmer. The stone near your feet has cooled, but the dog has replaced it, which seems like a fair trade unless you ask the dog, who clearly believes it is providing a premium service. The cabin smells crowded, smoky, alive. The storm smells like nothing at all because it's outside, pressing, erasing, waiting. You breathe slowly. The animals breathe too. And in that layered breathing beneath wool, hide, feathers, fur, smoke, and snow, the night becomes less empty than it seemed. You wake because the room has changed shape. Not physically, not in any way a carpenter would admit, but in the way a dark room changes when the outside world presses too close. The air feels thicker, quieter. The wind still moves over the cabin, yet its sound is lower now, muffled, as if the storm has wrapped the walls in wool. For a moment you lie very still beneath the quilts, listening to the dog breathe against your feet and the hens mutter softly near the stove. Then you understand. Snow is piled against the door. You can feel it before anyone opens their eyes fully. The draft under the threshold is weaker, which should be good news, and yet it carries an uneasy meaning. The storm has built a wall where the entrance used to be. The cabin is no longer merely standing in the blizzard. It is being slowly absorbed by it. The stove glows faintly across the room. Its light touches the low ceiling, the hanging clothes, the table legs, and the shadowed outline of the door. The rolled blanket remains pressed along the bottom, but above it frost has thickened in feathery patterns. Around the latch, the wood shines pale. You hear a faint granular hiss outside, snow sliding down the face of the door in tiny settling movements. Someone else wakes. A blanket rustles. A chair creaks. No one speaks loudly. Speech feels too large for the hour. The person near the stove lifts the lamp chimney and coaxes the flame higher. The cabin grows amber again, and everyone looks toward the same place. The door. It seems ordinary enough from inside. A few boards, a latch, a leather pull stiff with cold. But now it holds back more than weather. It holds back weight. A grounded fact of High Plains blizzards belongs here. Wind-driven snow can form deep drifts against buildings, fences, wagons, and natural hollows, sometimes blocking exits and obscuring windows, even when the total snowfall is not enormous. On open country like Wyoming, the wind does not simply let snow fall. It moves it, sorts it, packs it, steals it from one place and piles it in another with the energy of a very cold accountant. You push back the bedding and sit up. Cold flows into the warm pocket you made under the quilts. Your body objects immediately. Your feet search for the dog, but the dog has already lifted its head, alert and offended by the possibility of morning. The wrapped stone near your toes has gone cool. The cabin floor waits below, hard and cold, and you take a breath before lowering your feet. The first touch is sharp enough to make you reconsider every choice that brought humanity down from trees. You pull on socks that are not quite dry, then boots. The leather resists, stiff and unfriendly, and your fingers fumble at the tops. The air near the floor is colder than the air near your face. You remember the stove, the iron sun, still ticking faintly. It has burned low during the night, and the room carries that fragile feeling of heat that must be rebuilt before anyone can think clearly. A hand reaches for the door latch. Everyone watches. The latch lifts. The door does not move, not even politely. The person tries again, bracing one shoulder and pushing. The boards groan. A fine powder of frost loosens along the frame. Something outside compresses with the dull, dense sound. The door opens perhaps the width of 2 fingers, just enough to admit a blade of white light and a curl of snow dust that spills inward across the floor. Then it stops. The dog, now fully awake, sniffs the crack with great seriousness. This is apparently a matter requiring professional inspection. A soft laugh moves through the room, because laughter is one way to keep worry from sitting down too comfortably. The door is not impossible, not yet, but it is blocked. Someone will have to dig from inside, scraping away packed snow with a shovel, a pan, a board, anything available. If the storm is still hard, opening the gap too much could invite half the weather into the room. Here is a small oddity from winter life on the plains in some cabins and sod houses. People kept a shovel or scoop inside specifically because the outside shovel might be on the wrong side of a drift. It sounds obvious after the first time you need it. Before that, it is the sort of wisdom learned by standing in a cabin and staring at a door that has become less of a door and more of a suggestion. The shovel is found near the wall, not a grand tool, just a worn handle and a metal blade polished by work. The person at the door kneels and begins scraping through the narrow opening. Snow spills inward, cold and clean and faintly blue in the lamp glow. It piles on the floor in little ridges. The dog tries to investigate, receives a quiet command to move, and obeys with the wounded dignity of an assistant who has been underappreciated. You help by holding the lamp. The flame trembles in your hand. Through the widening gap, you see only snow, not yard, not corral, not fence, just the pale face of the drift packed against the threshold. It is strange to see outside as a solid thing. The storm has turned space into matter. The air entering through the crack smells different from the cabin. It is clean, metallic, and utterly cold. It cuts through smoke, wool, feathers, dog, and sleep. It smells like distance, like nothing alive has touched it. Snow scrapes. The shovel thuds. The door opens another inch, then another. A slab of drift breaks and slides inward, scattering crystals across the floorboards. Someone mutters that the storm has kindly delivered the yard into the house, which is thoughtful of it, really, though not especially convenient. The window, too, has changed. Frost has thickened over most of it, but along the lower half the glass is darkened by snow packed outside. Only the upper corner gives a dim view of motion. The cabin feels buried, not entirely, but enough that your mind imagines earth, tunnels, caves, all the places humans have hidden from weather across centuries. A log cabin on the Wyoming plains begins, at such a moment, to feel like a snow cave with furniture. Some scholars have continued to dispute how often settlers in the West were truly trapped inside by drifts, since dramatic stories often travelled faster than ordinary weather records. Yet even if only some accounts were embroidered by memory, the basic experience was real enough. Doors blocked, paths lost, windows whitened, barns vanished from sight. The danger was not only being sealed in, but needing to go out while the world had erased every useful clue. The door finally opens wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. No one does yet. The wind is still moving, and snow flickers past the opening in long pale streams. Beyond the threshold, the ground has risen almost to the bottom of the latch. The yard is no longer level. It is sculpted into smooth waves, hollows, and ridges. Somewhere under that white surface lies yesterday's path to the shed. You stand there holding the lamp, watching the pale light touch the drift. The snow reflects it back softly, making the cabin glow from below. It is beautiful in a quiet, inconvenient way. That is one of winter's more annoying habits. It can endanger you while looking composed enough for poetry. The door is pushed closed again to save warmth. The rolled blanket returns to its place. Snow brought inside is swept away from the threshold before it melts too deeply into the floor. The stove is fed. The room exhales as flame catches. You climb back beneath the bedding, but the knowledge remains. Outside, the cabin is being reshaped by snow. The doorway is no longer a simple passage. It is a task. The window is no longer a view. It is a pale, blind eye. The world beyond the walls exists, but only as a pressure, a weight, a whiteness waiting for daylight. And as the stove begins to strengthen, as the dog settles again with a long sigh, you close your eyes knowing that the blizzard has drawn closer in the night, not with footsteps, not with a voice, but with snow against the door. The sounds begin after the door is cleared and the room grows quiet again. At first, they seem ordinary. The stove murmurs in its iron sleep. The dog breathes in a slow rhythm near your feet. A hen shifts under the cloth and gives a tiny irritated cluck, as if dreaming of a warmer century. Someone in the room turns beneath a blanket, straw ticking softly under their weight. These are close sounds, human sounds, animal sounds, the sort that help the mind understand where it is. Then the wider night speaks. It comes through the walls as a long hollow note, rising from the north, sliding over the roof and dipping under the eaves. Not a howl exactly, not a whistle either. More like the sound made by an enormous empty bottle when the world blows across its mouth. You open your eyes in the dimness. The cabin is almost dark now, except for the red pulse of the stove and the faint grey glow at the frosted window. The wind changes again. It presses flat against one wall, then swirls away. A loose board somewhere outside taps twice, then pauses, then taps 3 times. The pattern is just irregular enough to feel intentional, which is very rude of it. Your sleepy brain listens and begins inventing visitors. A hand at the wall, a boot on the step, a rider arriving through the storm. But no, only wood, wind, and nerves performing theatre together. On the high plains, sound behaves strangely in winter. Snow can muffle some noises while hard frozen ground and open air carry others farther than expected. A common observation from frontier travellers and residents was that the plains could feel both vast and oddly intimate, with distant animal calls, train whistles, or storm sounds seeming to drift across enormous space. In a blizzard, though, that space becomes confused. Near sounds vanish, far sounds appear beside you. The world loses its usual distances. You lie still and listen. Somewhere beyond the cabin, a coyote calls. The sound rises thin and wavering through the storm, then breaks into a second voice, then maybe a third. They're far away, or perhaps not far enough. The dog lifts its head instantly. A low growl begins in its chest, not loud, just a private statement of professional concern. Another coyote answers, stretched and lonely. The call bends through the wind until it hardly sounds like an animal at all. It sounds like the night remembering something. You know, in the sensible part of your mind, that coyotes belong here. They are not ghosts. They are not omens. They are animals moving through weather, hungry, alert, better suited to this land than you are under 6 blankets and a borrowed sense of confidence. Still, when their voices travel through a blizzard outside a small Wyoming cabin, reason becomes only one member of the committee. A small piece of plains folklore drifts into the room with their calls. Many Western communities treated coyote voices as weather signs, luck signs, nuisance warnings, or eerie night music, depending on who was telling the story and how much coffee they'd consumed. Some people claimed coyotes called more before storms. Others insisted they cried after storms. The coyote, not available for comment, continued doing whatever coyotes do and allowed humans to build theories around it. Very generous of them. The wind covers the calls, then it uncovers them again, A shutter rattles, though the window has no proper shutter, only a loose scrap of board fastened near the frame. It knocks softly against the wall. Your eyes follow the sound, even though you cannot see it. The roof beam gives a deep wooden complaint. Snow slides somewhere outside in a small rushing fall, perhaps from a drift settling against the wall, perhaps from the roof edge. You remember the snow against the door. You remember the way outside became solid, the way the yard vanished. Now, with the coyotes calling and the boards shifting, the cabin feels less like a house and more like a small boat surrounded by a white sea. The stove is the lantern. The bed is the cargo. Everyone inside is hoping the weather does not notice how small the boat is. Some researchers still dispute how much fear of wild animals shaped daily life for settlers, compared with the more ordinary dangers of cold, injury, hunger, and distance. Wolves, coyotes, and other predators appear often in memory, story, and newspaper writing. But the greatest threat on a night like this may be less dramatic: a failed fire, a lost path, a frozen hand, an animal left too long without shelter. Yet fear does not always rank dangers accurately. It listens to the dark and chooses the sound with teeth. The dog growls again. Someone whispers its name, soft and low. The dog quiets, though one ear remains lifted. The coyotes fade. Now only the storm remains. But the storm has many voices. It sighs along the chinking, finding the same cracks you learned earlier. It rushes over the roof in sheets. It hums in the stovepipe, making the fire breathe unevenly. It moves through the corral fence with a sound like distant strings. It pushes fine snow against the door, grain by grain. A dry whisper that seems too small to matter until you remember how drifts are made. You close your eyes again, but the dark behind your eyelids fills with shapes. The horse turning in its shelter, the chickens tucked beneath their cloth, the rope that might lead to the barn if anyone must go out, the window filmed with frost, the stove door glowing red, the door half buried in snow. Each detail returns as sound. The world has become something you hear more than see. This is part of trying to sleep during a blizzard. The body may be still, but attention keeps walking. It walks to the roof when timber creaks. It walks to the door when snow shifts. It walks to the corral when a hoof thuds faintly. It walks miles into the white when coyotes call. Then, gently, it comes back to the bed, to the weight of quilts, to the dog's warmth near your feet, to the slow tick of iron cooling and heating again. The lamp has been turned down almost to nothing. Shadows deepen in the corners. The stove's glow paints the room in soft red breaths. Someone coughs once, then settles. The air smells of banked fire, wool, fur, straw, and faint cold leaking through timber. You breathe it in slowly. It is not fresh exactly. It is too lived in for that. But it is safe enough for now. A stronger gust hits the cabin and the whole structure answers. Logs creak. The roof groans. The hanging pan gives one bright, nervous clink. Then, just as suddenly, the wind eases and silence opens beneath it. That silence is almost louder. You wait inside it. The dog waits too. The stove ticks. A coal shifts and falls inward with a soft collapse. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, the coyotes begin again, farther off this time, their voices thinner, nearly dissolved in snow. You let them become part of the night. Not a warning now, not a story, just another thread in the fabric of this place, alongside wind, timber, animal breath, and the steady effort of warmth. Your mind loosens its grip on each sound. The tapping board becomes only a board. The creaking roof becomes only timber. The calling coyotes become animals moving under the same storm that holds you. And gradually, with the wide empty land still speaking in the strange voices around the cabin, sleep edges closer, careful as a creature crossing snow. The railroad is too far away to save you tonight, yet close enough to haunt the imagination. You think of it while the coyotes fade into the storm and the cabin returns to its smaller sounds. The stove ticks, the dog sighs, snow brushes softly against the wall. Somewhere under the drifted yard, the path to the corral waits like a memory with poor manners. You lie beneath the heavy bedding, warm enough now to think beyond the room, and your mind travels southward or eastward, depending on where this cabin sits, toward iron tracks stretched across the Wyoming dark. Out there, beyond the white blindness, the Union Pacific line cuts across the territory like a narrow promise. Rails, ties, telegraph poles, stations, water tanks, section houses, and small settlements mark a new kind of connection across an old and difficult land. In daylight, in fair weather, the railroad can seem almost miraculous. It brings flour, tools, cloth, letters, newspapers, stoves, coal, strangers, rumours, wages, and departures. It makes distance feel negotiable. But in a blizzard, even iron has limits. You imagine a train somewhere in the storm, its headlamp turned into a pale blur, its engine pushing steam into air already full of flying snow. The wheels strike the rails with a rhythm that might normally be comforting, that steady iron heartbeat of 19th century progress. Tonight, the sound would be swallowed quickly. Snow can drift over tracks, switches can freeze, telegraph lines can sag with ice or snap under wind. A station lamp can disappear only yards from the platform. A reliable historical point sits quietly in the dark. The Transcontinental Railroad had reached and crossed Wyoming by the late 1860s, and by the 1870s it was central to the territory's economy. Settlement patterns, military movement, and communication. Towns such as Cheyenne, Laramie, Rawlins, Green River, and others grew in relation to the line. Yet the railroad did not erase winter. It merely gave winter new things to interrupt. Inside the cabin, that fact feels both comforting and cruel. Somewhere, there are people near stations. Somewhere, a telegraph operator may be listening to wind batter the office wall while messages wait in thin electric pulses. Somewhere, freight sits under tarps. Somewhere, a passenger coach holds people trying to sleep upright, wrapped in coats, breath fogging the glass. Pretending they are not worried each time the train slows, you turn your face slightly against the pillow, which smells faintly of smoke and old feathers. The bedding rustles, the dog shifts but does not abandon your feet. Its loyalty may be emotional, it may also be thermal. Let us not over-romanticize the dog. The cabin and the railroad belong to the same world, but they feel like different centuries. Here, heat is a stove that needs feeding by hand. Light is a lamp that smokes if trimmed badly. News arrives late, folded, stained, carried, remembered. Out by the tracks, metal wheels move mail and machinery across distances that would have exhausted wagon teams. Yet even there, people still depend on shovels, lanterns, coal, muscle, and the stubborn hope that nothing has frozen solid at the exact wrong moment. A curious railroad detail drifts into the room like a spark from the stove in snowy regions. Railroads use snow sheds, flangers, ploughs, and crews with shovels to keep lines open. But on windy plains, drifting snow could be as troublesome as deep snowfall. The problem was not always how much fell from the sky. It was where the wind decided to put it afterward. The wind, as you have already learned from the door, has no respect for human scheduling. You can almost see the telegraph poles marching beside the track. Dark vertical strokes in the storm. Their wires hum in ordinary wind. In hard weather, they sing, snap, or vanish into the white. To people scattered across Wyoming, those wires might represent news from the outside world, military orders, market prices, family messages, and warnings. The line could make the distant nation feel close, but if the wire went silent, the silence itself became news. The stove gives a low sigh as fuel settles. Someone rises to check it, moving carefully in the dim room. The fire brightens, then softens again. That small act brings your mind back from the rails to the cabin. Still, the thought remains. Perhaps a train is delayed tonight. Perhaps a station agent is stamping his feet near a stove much like this one. Perhaps passengers are sleeping badly, heads bobbing, collars turned up, while snow taps at the coach windows. It is easy, from a later age, to imagine the railroad as pure progress. Fast, modern, confident, all polished brass and timetable ambition. But the people living near it knew better. A timetable is a lovely document until weather reads it and laughs quietly. Freight might be late. Mail might not arrive. Coal might be delayed. A family waiting for supplies could feel each missed train in the cupboard, in the woodpile, in the small calculations that happen before sleep. Some historians have long debated whether the railroad made frontier communities more secure by tying them to markets and communication, or more dependent on distant systems that could fail in dramatic ways. In the cabin tonight, both ideas feel true. Without the railroad, perhaps there would be no iron stove here, no sacks of flour brought from far away, no affordable tools, no newspaper used to stuff a drafty seam. With the railroad, there is also waiting for shipments, waiting for letters, waiting for word that the line is open again, waiting for a whistle that may not come through the storm. You listen for it now, though you know it is unlikely. At first, there is only wind. Then a low sound moves somewhere beyond the cabin. It could be nothing more than a gust crossing the stovepipe, or a loose board, or the horse shifting in its shelter. Yet your sleepy mind shapes it into a distant whistle, thin and mournful, almost imagined. You hold still. The sound fades. Perhaps there was no train at all. Perhaps the planes have borrowed the idea of one. That is what isolation does. It turns memory into sound. You remember the door blocked by snow, the window whitened, the small world of bed and stove. You remember that beyond this room are routes, rails, stations, wires, and towns. But none of them can be touched from here without first opening the door and stepping into the storm. Connection exists, yes, but tonight it is theoretical, comforting in the mind, not especially useful for cold toes. The person tending the stove returns to a chair and wraps a blanket tighter around the shoulders. The room darkens again. The hens settle. The dog's warmth presses against your feet. Snow continues its soft, patient work outside, covering tracks, rounding fence posts, filling hollows, making the yard look less like a place people use and more like a page being erased. If a train does pass miles away, its passengers will not know this cabin. They will not know the dog has stolen part of the bed, or that a shovel waits by the door, or that the stove has become the centre of all human ambition. You will not know them either. And yet, for a moment, you belong to the same storm. They in their rocking carriages, you under your heavy quilts, the station agent by his lamp, the telegraph operator listening to the wire, the section crew perhaps already dreading morning. All across the territory, sleep is being negotiated. Some negotiate it with coal engines and frozen switches, some with iron stoves and drifted doors, some with a blanket on a depot bench, some with a buffalo robe in a wagon stopped too far from shelter. Wyoming night gathers them all beneath the same white weather and lets each believe, quietly, that morning will come if they can only hold steady. You stop listening for the whistle. Instead, you listen to the stove, closer and more faithful. The railroad may promise connection, but the fire promises the next hour. For tonight, the next hour is enough. By the time the thought of the railroad fades, the room seems to sink lower into the earth. Not literally, of course. You're still in the cabin, still under quilts, still listening to the stove breathe through the dark. Yet your mind begins to wander toward another kind of shelter used across the plains, one that does not stand bravely against the weather so much as tuck itself beneath it. A dugout, a sod room, a hollow cut into a bank, roofed with poles, brush, earth, and hope. You imagine leaving the log cabin behind and stepping down into such a place. Not tonight, perhaps, but on another winter evening in 1870s Wyoming, when the wind has already begun smoothing the land flat and the sky has lowered into snow. Instead of opening a door into a room raised above the ground, you descend slightly, ducking under a low lintel, entering a space that smells of damp soil, smoke, stored food, and human breath. At first, it feels warmer. That is the great gift of earth. It steadies extremes. While wind tears across the open plains above, thick walls of soil hold a more constant temperature than exposed timber. A basic historical truth belongs here across many parts of the Great Plains and Western Territories. Settlers used dugouts and sod houses because lumber was scarce or costly, while earth and sod were close at hand. These shelters could be crude, dark, and damp, but they offered protection from wind and cold that a poorly sealed frame building might envy. You step inside in your imagination, carrying a small lamp. The flame lifts and steadies, showing walls packed hard by shovel and hand. Roots poke from the ceiling in thin brown threads. The roof is low enough to make posture a moral challenge. If you are tall, the dugout begins teaching humility immediately. A stove or fireplace smoulders at one end, vented through a pipe that must be watched carefully, because smoke trapped underground has no sense of hospitality. The floor is dirt, swept but never truly clean. Every footstep releases a faint earthy smell. In summer, such a place might feel close and sour. In winter, it can feel almost protective, like being held in the palm of the ground. The wind outside becomes less direct here. It does not strike the walls with the same sharp force. Instead, it passes overhead, a muted rush, as if the storm is searching above you and has not yet thought to look below. You understand the appeal at once. Sleep might come more easily in such a place because the wind cannot find every seam. There are fewer cracks to whistle through if most of the wall is earth. There is less rattling timber, less trembling glass, less of that cruel little needle of air touching your wrist, your neck, the place behind your ear. The dugout wraps sound in soil and turns the blizzard into a distant pressure. But comfort, as usual, has brought paperwork. The same earth that keeps out wind brings dampness. Moisture gathers on walls. Bedding can smell musty. Clothing may never feel fully dry. In a thaw, water might seep downward. In a hard freeze, the walls may glitter faintly with frost near the entrance. The room can feel both warmer and less clean, safer and more suffocating. History enjoys these bargains. It rarely hands out a solution without slipping in a complication, like a shopkeeper adding a suspicious extra item to your bill. A strange little frontier detail comes to mind. Some sod houses and dugouts had unexpected visitors in their walls and roofs, including insects, mice, snakes in warmer seasons, and roots that kept growing through the ceiling. Imagine trying to sleep while a small shower of dirt falls near your pillow because something above you. Perhaps a mouse, perhaps gravity, perhaps the roof expressing itself, has decided the night needed texture. Very restful, very rustic. 5 stars from no one. Still, on a blizzard night, you might forgive a great deal. You picture a bed built against one earthen wall, piled with quilts, robes, and coats just as in the cabin. A trunk sits nearby, its lid covered with a folded shawl to keep damp from settling too deeply. A few dishes rest on a shelf made from rough boards. Potatoes or turnips may be stored in a corner where the cold holds them but does not ruin them. The lamp flame throws soft shadows over the uneven walls, and those shadows move slowly, unlike the frantic snow outside. The smell is deeper here. Smoke settles into the clay. Wet wool holds the odour of animals and weather. The stove gives off iron heat, but beneath it all is the cool breath of soil, old and mineral, like a cellar after rain. You breathe it in and feel the body respond differently than it did in the log cabin. Less alert to drafts, perhaps, more aware of closeness. The air has weight. Scholars continue to wrestle with how dugouts should be remembered as signs of poverty and hardship, as clever environmental adaptation, or as temporary shelters that later nostalgia made more picturesque than they felt at midnight in wet socks. The answer depends on the dugout, the family, the season, and the storyteller. A person newly arrived from a town in the east might find such a shelter shocking. A person who had spent a day in open wind might call it paradise with dirt walls. You sit on the bed and hear snow brushing the entrance. It is quieter here. The storm no longer seems to slap the structure, only bury it by degrees. That may comfort you for a while. Then another thought arrives. If the entrance drifts shut, the dugout may feel even more sealed than a cabin. If smoke backs up, the low ceiling gives it nowhere polite to go. If a roof leaks, the drip may fall directly onto bedding. If the lamp goes out, darkness underground is complete in a way that feels older than human memory. You lie down anyway, because tiredness is persuasive. The bedding is heavy. The wall beside you is cool when your knuckles brush it. A grain or two of soil falls from above and lands near your cheek. You decide not to think about it too much, which is one of the great survival strategies of domestic life. The stove glows in the corner dull red through its vent. Someone has hung damp mittens near it. They steam faintly, filling the air with the smell of wet leather and smoke. Outside, the blizzard continues. You know it does because the roof whispers. Snow moves across the sod and earth above, but the sound is softened into something almost gentle. The storm that felt enormous in the log cabin now feels distant, as though you are listening from inside the body of the land itself. There is comfort in that thought. People before you, long before Wyoming was a territory, understood earth shelter in many forms: indigenous earth lodges, storage pits, root cellars, dugouts, sod houses, mining cabins banked with soil. All belong to a broad human knowledge that the ground can protect as well as resist. The 1870s settler in a dugout was not inventing the idea of sleeping beneath earth. They were joining a very old conversation between weather and shelter. Your eyelids lower. The room is dark, warm enough, damp enough, close enough to make each breath sound private. Somewhere near the entrance, snow settles with a faint hush. Somewhere in the roof, a root creaks or a mouse moves, and you choose generosity. Let it pass. Let the small underground world hold. You remember the cabin door blocked by snow, the dog at your feet, the iron stove, the imagined railroad. Now you add this earthen room to the chain of shelters in your mind. Timber above ground, sod against wind, dugout beneath the storm, each one imperfect, each one human. And as the blizzard slides over the roof instead of striking the walls, sleep comes in a lower, darker, earth-scented wave. Food becomes part of the night before hunger fully wakes. You sense it in the way someone rises quietly near the stove, not with the urgency of morning cooking, but with the careful movements of a person trying to make warmth, smell, and a little comfort stretch through the darkest hours. The dugout fades from your thoughts, and the cabin gathers around you again. Log walls, frosted window, door still guarded by drift, dog at your feet, hens under their cloth, stove breathing low and red. A pot is lifted. A lid clicks softly. The sound is small, but your stomach hears it immediately and becomes far more alert than the rest of you. This is not fair exactly, but the body has its own politics. The air changes as food warms. Smoke remains, wool remains, damp fur remains. But now there is the deeper scent of beans, bacon grease, coffee, and something starchy left near the stove to soften. The smell moves through the cabin slowly, touching the bedding first, then the chair, then the table, then the cold wall where draughts gather. It is not a feast. It is not even pretending to be a feast. It is survival food, plain and steady. And in the middle of a blizzard, it smells almost luxurious. You push yourself up on one elbow beneath the quilts. The room is dim, but the stove glow outlines a hand stirring the pot. The spoon moves with a dull scrape along the bottom. A little steam escapes. Someone adds a pinch of salt as if performing a ceremony. Perhaps they are salt, heat, and something filling have made many nights bearable long before anyone thought of calling it cuisine. A firm piece of historical reality belongs in the simple meal frontier households in Wyoming, and across the wider West often depended on shelf-stable staples such as flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, bacon, dried fruit, cornmeal, rice, molasses, and hard bread or biscuits, especially during winter when travel and supply were uncertain. Fresh meat, milk, eggs, or vegetables might appear when available, but storms made every pantry feel smaller. Food was not just eaten, it was counted. The pot gives another soft bubble. You remember the railroad's distant promise, those trains that might bring sacks of flour and coffee tins when the line stayed open. Tonight, that promise rests in the cupboard, already measured out. Perhaps a barrel of flour stands in the corner, its lid weighted against mice. Perhaps beans sit in a cloth sack, hard as little stones until hours of soaking and simmering persuade them to become dinner. Perhaps coffee waits in a tin, guarded with more devotion than some legal documents. The coffee pot is lifted onto the stove. Soon the smell sharpens, dark and bitter. Frontier coffee can be boiled until it becomes less a drink than a challenge. It may be clarified with eggshells if someone has them, stretched with roasted grain if supplies are thin, or simply endured because hot bitterness in a cup is better than cold nobility in an empty hand. You imagine taking the cup between both palms, letting heat seep into your fingers. The first sip would be harsh, the second would be necessary. By the third, you might declare it excellent, mainly because it is warm and no one wishes to discourage the person who made it. A lesser-known kitchen habit drifts in with the steam some travellers and frontier cooks kept a sourdough starter, alive like a small household creature, feeding it carefully so bread, biscuit, or flapjacks could be made without commercial yeast. In cold weather, people sometimes tuck the starter near warmth, even close to bedding, because nobody wanted the family yeast to freeze to death. Imagine sharing a winter cabin with children, chickens, a dog, and a jar of sourdough that also apparently requires emotional support. History does keep the guest list interesting. Tonight, perhaps there is no fresh bread. Perhaps there are biscuits from earlier, hard at the edges, ready to be softened in coffee or bean broth. One is placed near the stove, then broken. The sound is dry, almost wooden. You accept a piece in your imagination, holding it between chilled fingers. It smells faintly of flour, smoke, and old grease. You dip it into the warm broth and wait until it gives way. Outside, the wind presses snow along the door again. The cabin answers with a low creak. The storm has not ended. It has simply become part of the background, like the ticking stove and the dog's breath. Yet food changes the mind. A room with hot food in it feels more defended than a room without it. Hunger sharpens fear. Warmth and beans, humble as they are, smooth its edges. You sit closer to the stove with a cup in your hands. Heat rises into your face, your toes, betrayed earlier by the cold floor. Slowly forgive existence. Around the room, others eat quietly, not much, just enough. A spoonful of beans, a strip of bacon divided carefully, a biscuit half, a swallow of coffee. Food at night is comfort, but it is also inventory. Every bite asks what remains for morning. That is the frontier arithmetic no one writes on slate. How much flour until the next trip to town? How much coffee until the road clears? How many eggs if the hens recover their dignity after spending the night inside? How long can bacon last if the weather continues? Can the cow be milked if the drift blocks the shed? Can anyone reach the stored potatoes without opening the wrong door to the storm? The old questions gather around the table. They do not ruin the meal, exactly. They simply sit beside it. Students of frontier life still debate how much winter hunger in places like Wyoming came from actual scarcity, how much from monotony, and how much from anxiety about supplies being cut off. A family might have enough calories stored away and still feel uneasy if every meal looked too much like the last one. Beans again, bacon again, coffee again, hard bread again. The body can survive repetition better than the spirit sometimes can. Though, to be fair, the spirit becomes less philosophical when the coffee is hot. You taste salt, smoke, grease, and the soft earthiness of beans. Nothing is fancy. Everything is vivid. Food in a storm reaches deeper than flavour. It reminds you that the household still has order. Someone can still cook. The stove still works. The pot still bubbles. The spoon still moves. The blizzard has taken the yard, the path, the window, and perhaps the railroad timetable. But it has not taken this small circle of eating. The dog lifts its head, suddenly awake with the spiritual intensity of an animal who has heard bacon think about falling. Its eyes catch the stove light. Someone tells it no. The dog remains hopeful. Hope, apparently, is also a frontier staple. A crumb drops. The dog succeeds. This small victory does more for morale than anyone admits. After eating, the dishes are not washed with generous water. Water must be fetched, melted, heated, spared. A cup may be wiped. A spoon may be cleaned quickly. The pot may wait until morning if no one has the strength to argue with it. Grease is saved when useful. Scraps are not wasted. Even ashes have their place. Every substance in the cabin belongs to some cycle of use, reuse, or reluctant endurance. The coffee warms your chest, then spreads a wakefulness you did not entirely request. That is the trouble with drinking it at night. But someone must tend the stove, and frontier sleep often comes in shifts anyway. You pull the quilts closer around your shoulders and settle back, full enough to feel human, not full enough to feel careless. The room smells richer now, beans cooling, coffee darkening, bacon smoke lingering in the curtains if there are curtains, in the blankets if there are not, in everyone's hair regardless. The stove glows again, fed for the next stretch of night. Outside, the snow keeps moving, but inside, warmth and food have made a small pause in the fear. You lie down slowly. Your stomach is calmer, your hands are warmer. The dog returns to your feet, perhaps dreaming of crumbs that history unfairly failed to preserve in official records. The hens settle beneath their cloth. The cup is placed near the stove. The pot rests with its lid tilted, breathing out the last faint smell of beans into the dark. And as the cabin closes around you once more, you understand that sleep in this storm is not only made from blankets and fire, it is made from food enough for now. When the food quiets and the last taste of coffee fades from your mouth, the cabin returns to its oldest question. How much heat is left? Not warmth in the room, not comfort under the quilts. Those are only symptoms. The real question sits near the wall in the shadow pile of fuel, in the coal scuttle by the stove, in the few split sticks stacked with more hope than confidence. It sits in every glance toward the firebox and every pause before opening the stove door. You can feel it even with your eyes half closed. The room is warmer now from food, flame, bodies, and the stubborn presence of the dog at your feet. But warmth is a spending thing. It must be paid for hour by hour. The storm outside spends nothing. It has the whole sky for credit. Someone rises again, wrapped in a blanket, and walks toward the stove. The floor gives small cold creaks beneath each step. The stove door opens, and red light spreads across the room. You see the glow catch on the kettle, the chair legs, the edge of the table, the cloth over the hens, and the worn face of the person bending close to judge the fire. The coals are alive, but low. A few flames lick at blackened wood, then shrink back. The fuel pile is inspected with a silence that says more than words. A plain historical reality belongs to this moment in many parts of Wyoming and the high plains. Accessible timber was limited, especially away from river bottoms and mountain foothills, so fuel could be scarce or costly. Coal from mines and railroad supply points became important where available, while settlers and travellers sometimes relied on gathered brush, driftwood, sage, or dried animal dung. The exact fuel depended on location, money, transport, and luck, which is not a comforting list when the wind is trying to enter your bedroom. A stick of wood is lifted, considered, then set aside. Another is chosen instead, smaller, crooked, less satisfying. You almost laugh at how careful the choice is. It resembles selecting jewellery, except the jewel is a half-frozen piece of fuel that will become ash by morning. The person feeds it into the stove and waits. It catches slowly. A little flame opens, then another. The door closes. The room brightens by a fraction. No one says that the woodpile is low. No one needs to. The cabin already knows. The smell of the stove changes when fuel changes. Wood gives a resinous, a smoky comfort when dry enough, a bitter dampness when not. Coal burns with a heavier mineral smell, darker and more serious. Like the earth itself has been persuaded to smoulder. Dried dung, when used, can burn steadily if well dried, though nobody writes love poetry about the fragrance, or perhaps someone did and wisely left it unsigned. There is a small, almost comic truth from plains. Survival buffalo chips were once so useful as fuel that travellers gathered them along routes and carried them for campfires, especially where wood was scarce. The phrase can sound amusing from a comfortable couch. In a storm, it becomes less amusing and more like a practical miracle wearing an undignified name. People have survived on many things that later generations giggle about. History does not mind. It has heard worse. You pull the quilt higher and listen to the stove. A good fire has layers. At first, the small crackle of new fuel, then the deeper settling of embers, then the iron body ticking as it gathers heat. When fuel is plentiful, these sounds comfort you. When fuel is scarce, they become a countdown. Each crackle means warmth now and less later. Each bright flare asks whether anyone has miscalculated. The cabin's corners remain cold. Even with the stove fed, the far wall holds a pale frost near the seams. The door is still blocked by drift beyond its frame. The window is opaque. Somewhere outside, snow covers whatever fuel may be stacked there, If any remains within reach, that is the quiet cruelty. You may have more wood outside, but outside has become another country. Someone checks the shovel near the door, because it is not used yet. Perhaps at dawn, if the wind softens, someone will dig to the woodpile or shed. Perhaps not. The decision waits. A trip out now would spend heat from the room, heat from the body, and time that could be used for sleep. The stove asks for fuel, but the storm charges interest. Writers of frontier history have often disagreed over whether fuel scarcity was mainly an environmental problem, an economic problem, or a transport problem. In truth, the categories blur. There might be timber in the mountains and none on the plains. There might be coal by the railroad, but not enough money to buy much. There might be fuel outside the door and a drift between you and it. There might be a barn full of wood and a whiteout fierce enough to make the barn disappear. Scarcity is not always absence. Sometimes it is distance. You remember the railroad again, carrying coal, tools, iron stoves, and hope. You remember the dugout, where earth itself helped hold warmth. You remember the door sealed with snow. Each earlier thought returns now as part of the fuel question. A better shelter uses less fuel. A tighter door saves fuel. A shorter storm saves fuel. A generous woodpile saves worry. But tonight, all you have is the pile in the room and whatever remains beyond the walls. The person near the stove breaks a smaller stick by pressing it against the floor and leaning down hard. It snaps with a dry sound. The dog lifts its head, offended by this unnecessary drama, then lowers it again when no food appears. The broken pieces are placed near the stove to warm and dry before being added later. Even damp fuel may burn better after sitting close to heat. Nothing is wasted. Bark, splinters, old packing crate pieces, broken chair rungs if desperation grows, all may become part of the fire's appetite. The thought of burning furniture hovers at the edge of the room like an embarrassed guest. No one wants to do it. Everyone understands why it might be done. The stove door opens again only briefly, just enough to arrange the new piece. A longer opening would spill heat and disturb the draft. The person's hand moves quickly with the iron tool. Sparks blink and vanish. Ash shifts at the bottom of the firebox, pale and soft, the ghost of earlier warmth. You breathe slowly under the blankets. The air near your face has cooled. Your nose is cold again. That faithful little weather station. Beneath the covers, your body remains warm. But the warmth feels more precious now that you understand its cost. The quilts, the dog, the cooling stone, the shared bodies in the room, all become fuel of another kind. They conserve what the stove creates. Outside, the blizzard presses on without sound for a moment, then returns in a low rush. Snow slides along the wall. The cabin creaks. The stove answers with a small, steady tick. It is still working. The room still holds. A final cup of coffee is not made. The pot stays near the stove, dark and cooling. Coffee takes heat, washing takes heat. Opening the door takes heat. Standing up takes heat. Even worry takes heat, though it produces nothing useful in return. You tuck your hands beneath the quilt and let your fingers warm against your ribs. You begin to see how frontier sleep could be interrupted not only by fear, but by arithmetic. How many sticks until dawn? How many hours of coal? How low can the stove burn without letting the room fall too cold? Who will wake next? Who can sleep now because someone else is watching the fire? The person by the stove finally settles into the chair, blanket around the shoulders, face lit from below by the dull red glow. Not sleeping, not fully awake either, keeping company with the iron sun, guarding the slow exchange of fuel for warmth. And you, beneath the heavy bedding, listen as the fire takes the latest offering and turns it, little by little, into one more hour of survivable night. Somewhere beyond the cabin, beyond the drifted door and the vanished yard, someone is still outside. You think of them as the fire settles lower again and the room grows quiet around its red heart. Not because you can hear them. You cannot. The blizzard has wrapped the world too tightly for that. But once the mind has imagined the railroad, the station lamp, the delayed train, and the line of telegraph poles fading into snow, it begins to imagine every person caught between one shelter and the next. A stage driver hunched on a box seat, rein stiff in gloved hands, a soldier riding between posts with orders tucked inside his coat, a ranch hand trying to reach a line camp before dark, a freighter walking beside a team because the wagon has stuck in a drift, a migrant family stopped somewhere along a trail, deciding whether to stay with the wagon or search for a light that may not exist. The cabin feels warmer when you think of them, and also smaller. Your blankets become a kind of luck. The dog at your feet becomes luxury. The stove, with all its demands and ticking iron moods, becomes almost extravagant. Out there, a person might be trying to sleep sitting upright in a wagon, wrapped in a robe, while snow gathers in the folds of their coat and the horses stand with heads low against the wind. One ordinary but important fact about the 1870s West is that travel did not stop simply because conditions were dangerous. Mail contracts, military needs, freight schedules, livestock work, migration, and commerce kept people moving through weather that could turn quickly. Roads were often rough tracks rather than dependable roads in the modern sense, and distance between shelters could make a late decision costly. The phrase caught out sounds small. The experience was not. You imagine a stagecoach first. The coach has lost the clean shape it had at departure. Snow cakes on the wheels, leather curtains snap at the windows. The horses lean into the storm, their breath torn sideways. The driver's shoulders are white. His hat brim is frozen hard. Beside him, perhaps another man keeps watch, eyes narrowed against snow that feels like sand in the face. Inside the coach, passengers press close in darkness, knees knocking, hands tucked into sleeves. No one is enjoying the romance of travel. Romance, sensibly, has taken the next available train to somewhere warmer. If the driver can reach a station, there may be a stove, coffee, hay for the horses, and a place to sleep on a bench or floor. If he cannot, the coach itself becomes shelter, a poor one, but better than the open plain. Travellers might step down only to stamp their feet, clear a wheel, check a trace, or relieve themselves with all the dignity allowed by a blizzard, which is not much, then back inside, back under robes, back into the rocking, creaking dark. A peculiar travel detail from the period is that people sometimes use buffalo robes not only as bedding but as layered public armour against cold in coaches, wagons, slees, and rail cars. A robe could be shared across laps, tucked around boots, thrown over shoulders, or wrapped around a child until only eyes showed. It sounds cosy until several damp, tired strangers begin negotiating whose side of the robe is whose. Civilization is thin. Cold feet reveal this quickly. The wind outside the cabin gives a hard shove, and for a moment you can almost feel the coach lurching. Then your mind turns to a soldier. Wyoming in the 1870s held military posts, routes, and conflicts tied to United States expansion, indigenous resistance, railroad protection, and movement across the plains. A mounted soldier in winter carried not just a weapon, but a burden of weather. Wool uniform, greatcoat if issued and worn, gloves that might not stay dry, a blanket roll, a horse that needed care before the rider could think of sleep. Military discipline sounds impressive in history books, but discipline does not keep snow from sliding down your collar. You picture him reaching a post after dark if he is lucky. The gate opens, lanterns move, the stable smells of hay, manure, leather, and warm animals. The barracks hold rows of bunks, damp socks near stoves, men talking low, someone coughing, someone writing a letter by poor light. If he is not lucky, he stops where he can, perhaps near a ravine, perhaps beside a wagon, perhaps under canvas that snaps and strains overhead. Sleep for travellers is not really sleep. It is a series of brief disappearances. The head nods, the body jerks awake, a horse shifts, a wheel creaks, a companion says something that sounds like a warning but is only a complaint. You drift, wake, drift again. The cold enters through seams, cuffs, collars, boot leather, blanket edges, and any part of the soul foolish enough to remain optimistic. A point that researchers still discuss is whether written travel accounts overstate the terror of plains blizzards because dramatic stories were more likely to be recorded, or understate it because experienced travellers treated danger as ordinary and did not waste much ink on misery. Both possibilities have weight. A traveller who survived may have turned the night into a tale. Another may have written only bad storm, delayed, which is historically rude but very frontier. You listen to the cabin again. The stove is close. The chair creaks softly as the person keeping watch shifts. The hens sleep. The dog twitches. Your own fingers are warm beneath the quilt. You are inside, and the contrast feels almost embarrassing. Outside in your imagination, a ranch hand rides through a world without landmarks. Cattle work does not pause neatly for human comfort. Animals drift before storms. Fences break. A rider may be sent to check a herd, a water source, a line shack, a missing horse. In open snow, the difference between a familiar route and nowhere at all can vanish in minutes. The horse may know more than the rider. Wise riders respected that. Foolish ones sometimes learn too late that confidence is not a compass. The ranch hand reaches a line camp at last. Perhaps it is only a small cabin, poorer than this one, with a bunk, a stove, a few tins of food, and the smell of old leather. He leads the horse into shelter first, rubs it down if he can, breaks ice from the bit, gives feed, checks hooves, curses softly at frozen knots, then comes inside and discovers that the stove is cold. Before sleep, there is always another chore. The West is very committed to this principle. A freighter faces a different misery. Heavy wagons, loaded with goods, depend on teams and roads that storms can erase. If a wagon bogs down, the driver may unload part of the freight, clear snow, coax animals forward, or wait for help that cannot see him. Sleeping under the wagon, under canvas, or beside cargo becomes possible when exhaustion wins the argument against discomfort. Flour sacks, crates, barrels, iron tools, coffee, cloth, and stove parts may sit inches away. All the comforts of settlement packed neatly and uselessly while the driver shivers beside them. That is almost funny in the bleak way history sometimes is, surrounded by goods, short of comfort. You turn under the blankets and feel the heavy bedding answer. The cabin holds. The travellers outside do not all have such a hold. Their shelter may be a robe, a canvas cover, a snowbank dug for wind protection, a stopped coach, a barn reached after dark, a depot bench, or the lee side of a wagon. Their sleep comes in fragments, guarded by fear of frostbite, lost animals, broken wheels, fading fires, and the terrible temptation to lie down too completely when the body is dangerously cold. But not every story ends badly. Many travellers did reach shelter. Many drivers knew the land. Many horses found their way. Many stations kept lamps burning. Many strangers shared robes, coffee, floor space, and advice of varying quality. The frontier could be harsh, but it was not empty of care. Sometimes survival came from a door opening in a storm and someone saying, "Come in, quickly, before all the weather follows you." In the cabin, the stove gives one bright pulse as the fuel settles. You watch it through half-closed eyes and imagine distant lights across Wyoming, each one a small refusal of the storm, a station lamp, a barracks window, a ranch line camp, a dugout hearth, a lantern swinging beside a stuck wagon, a train headlamp blurred in snow, not enough to conquer winter, enough to keep people moving from one circle of warmth to the next. And as your breathing slows again, you think of those travellers wrapped in robes and worry, trying to sleep wherever the blizzard allows, while you remain beneath the quilts, listening to the same wind pass over them all. The night belongs, more than anyone admits, to the person who keeps it from falling apart. You notice this in the quiet after imagining travellers outside, because the cabin itself is not resting as much as it appears to be. The stove must be watched. The door must remain clear enough to open. The animals must be heard. Children, if they stir, must be soothed before fear spreads through the room like smoke. Bedding must be tucked. Damp clothes must be turned near the heat. Food must be saved, water managed, ash contained, and worry folded into movements so ordinary that no one calls them labour. Often that work falls to women. Not always, and never simply. Frontier households varied. Men cooked in camps. Bachelors mended and washed badly or well. Soldiers and ranch hands learned their own rough domestic routines, and necessity has never cared much for tidy categories. But in family cabins across the 19th century West, women frequently carried the night work of care, the labour that made survival feel like home instead of merely endurance. You see her now in the amber stovelight, a woman moving quietly through the room with a shawl pulled close around her shoulders. She has already slept in fragments, if she has slept at all. Her hair is pinned loosely, some strands escaping around her face. Her hands are rough from water, soap, cold, flour, ash, and mending. She pauses near the stove, not dramatically, not like a painting of a noble sacrifice, but like someone calculating whether the fire can wait another hour. A solid truth of frontier domestic history rests in her movements. Women's work in Western settlements often included cooking, preserving food, hauling or melting water, washing, sewing, tending children, nursing the sick, managing household supplies, helping with animals, and sometimes taking on field, shop, or wage labour as well. In winter storms, these duties did not pause. They narrowed, intensified, and moved closer to the stove. She lifts a shirt from a chair back and turns it so the dampest sleeve faces the heat. The cloth steams faintly. Then she checks a child curled beneath quilts near the wall. A small face appears in the bedding, flushed from warmth, nose cold at the tip. The child murmurs without waking. The woman tucks the quilt tighter around the shoulders and smooths the edge beneath the chin. It is a tiny action. It may prevent a chill. It may prevent crying. It may simply make the night kinder. History often misses these gestures because they do not announce themselves loudly enough. Near the table, a basin sits with water gone cool. Dishes from the late meal wait. Not many, but enough. She does not waste water scrubbing them now. She wipes what must be wiped and leaves what can wait. This is not laziness. It is strategy. A person who has never had to melt snow for water may have many opinions about cleanliness. The cabin politely ignores them. There is a faint smell of soap near the basin, mixed with bacon, grease and smoke. Laundry hangs in stiff shapes by the stove, never far enough from sparks for total peace of mind. A pair of small stockings dangles from a line. One mitten has been patched at the thumb with darker yarn. Every repaired thing in the room has a history of hands behind it. Mending is memory made useful. A curious domestic detail from frontier life is that women sometimes saved small scraps of fabric, thread, flour sacks, worn dresses, and even usable pieces from ruined clothing for quilts and repairs. Nothing simply became trash if it could become warmth. A flour sack might become a towel, a child's garment, a patch, a curtain, or part of bedding. Modern people call this sustainability and feel pleased with themselves. Frontier women might call it Tuesday. The wind pushes against the cabin, and she looks toward the door, not fearfully, measuringly. The drift will need attention again before morning if the storm keeps packing snow. She crosses the room, lifts the edge of the rolled blanket at the threshold, and touches the boards near the bottom. Cold. Some powder has entered again. She brushes it back with a small broom, then replaces the blanket. The motion is practiced, almost sleepy. You lie still beneath the quilts and watch her because watching is easier than admitting how much work remains while others rest. The stove glow catches the side of her face. She looks tired. Not picturesque tired. Real tired. The kind that sits behind the eyes and in the wrists. The kind that comes from being responsible for warmth, food, illness, cleanliness, comfort, and morale. All while pretending not to resent anyone too loudly because the walls are thin and everyone is already cold. Historians have offered different interpretations of frontier women's lives, some emphasizing hardship and isolation, others resilience, authority, and adaptability within households that depended on their skill. The debate matters because both images can become too simple. Women were not only victims of rough conditions, and they were not endlessly cheerful heroines smiling into the wash basin either. They were people, tired people, capable people, sometimes lonely, sometimes proud, sometimes furious, sometimes amused by the absurdity of keeping chickens under a cloth while a dog negotiates bed rights. The hens rustle just then, as if volunteering as evidence. She glances at them and shakes her head. Perhaps tomorrow, if the weather eases, they go back to the coop. Perhaps they do not. One hen gives a soft cluck. The dog opens one eye, sees no bacon, and returns to sleep. The woman smiles faintly despite herself. Small foolishness can be a kind of medicine. If someone is ill, the night grows heavier. A cough from a child, a feverish forehead, a husband with frostbitten fingers, an older relative whose breathing worries everyone. The woman may warm cloths, steep herbs if she has them, make tea, prepare a mustard plaster, rub chilled feet, or simply sit awake listening for changes. Frontier medicine is often described through bottles and remedies, but much of it was watchfulness, staying near, noticing, waiting, doing the next small thing. You hear a child cough softly. She's there before the second cough. A cup is lifted, perhaps water, perhaps weak tea, perhaps only a spoonful of warm liquid to soothe the throat. She supports the child's head and murmurs words too quiet for you to catch. The tone matters more than the words. The storm outside is large. Her voice makes the world small enough to bear. Then she returns to the stove. The fire is lower now. She opens the door with the iron tool and studies the coals. Not too much fuel, not too little. She adds a small piece, exactly as carefully as the watcher before her. The flame catches. Her face warms orange. Ash shifts softly. For a moment, she closes her eyes in the heat. That moment is hers. No one speaks. The cabin seems to hold its breath around her rest. Then she opens her eyes and continues. A cup is moved away from the edge of the table. A quilt is adjusted. A damp sock is turned. The coffee pot is nudged aside so it does not scorch. These movements are quiet enough to disappear, which is why they must be named. You begin to feel sleep returning, softened by the rhythm of her work. The cabin does not feel peaceful because the storm has stopped. It has not. It feels peaceful because someone has made order inside the disorder. Fire, bedding, food, children, animals, door, water, cloth. Each has been touched. Each has been noticed. At last. She sits near the stove with a blanket around her shoulders. Her hands rest in her lap. The firelight moves across her knuckles. For a few minutes, perhaps, she lets herself drift. Not deeply, not freely, but enough for her chin to lower and her breath to slow. Outside, the blizzard continues to cover the yard. Inside, the night remains stitched together by tired hands. And under the quilts, listening to those hands finally become still, you understand that sleep during a Wyoming blizzard is not only protected by logs, earth, iron, and wool, it is protected by care. The child wakes because the wind has found a new voice. It begins as a low hum near the roof, then slips into a thinner sound along the window frame, almost like someone drawing a wet finger around the rim of a glass. The noise rises, trembles, and fades. Beneath the quilts near the wall, a small body stiffens. You hear the rustle before you see the eyes open. Children learn weather before they understand it. They learn it by tone. By the way adults stop speaking mid-sentence when a gust strikes too hard. By the way a mother crosses the room toward the door without being asked. By the way fuel is counted in silence. By the way a horse's restless stamp makes everyone listen. A blizzard is not explained to them all at once. It arrives in fragments. Cold nose, heavy blankets, lamp turned low, dog allowed where it is usually not allowed, chickens inside, which is either alarming or hilarious depending on the child. The child looks toward the stove first. That makes sense. In this room, the stove is the closest thing to sunrise. Its dull red glow pulses through the vents, painting the cabin with soft colour. Then the child looks toward the window, but the window offers nothing. Frost has turned it into a pale, blind surface. The outside world has vanished, and for a young mind that can feel like magic performed by someone with questionable intentions, you shift slightly beneath your own bedding and watch as the woman by the stove lifts her head. She has not truly slept, not deeply. She hears the child before any crying begins. Her voice crosses the room in a whisper, calm and low, telling the child that it's only wind, only snow, only the same storm still passing. Only, adults use that word generously around children. Only wind, only thunder, only a coyote, only the roof creaking like it has remembered an old grievance. The word does not always convince the child, but it offers a place to begin. A steady fact of 19th century frontier family life belongs here. Children in rural Western households often took part in work from an early age, helping with fuel, water, animals, younger siblings, cleaning, food preparation, and seasonal chores as their strength allowed. Childhood still had play, curiosity, stories, and mischief. Of course, because children are not waiting politely for historians to define them. But responsibility entered early, especially when winter made every task more urgent. The child beneath the quilt may have carried chips for fuel earlier, small arms full of dried pieces gathered near the yard. Perhaps they helped bring in kindling before the storm. Perhaps they held a lantern while an adult checked a latch. Perhaps they scattered feed for chickens that now occupy a crate near the stove like feathered aristocrats under protest. These small chores shape how a child sleeps, not as a visitor to the storm, but as a minor member of the household defense committee. The wind hums again. The child's eyes widen. The dog lifts its head and, with excellent timing, yawns so enormously that the moment loses some of its terror. There are few things less supernatural than a dog displaying its entire pink tongue in stovelight. The child almost smiles. The dog, unaware of its contribution to emotional stability, resettles with the dignity of a creature who expects thanks in bacon. A small odd note from frontier childhood comes to mind. Children sometimes made games from the very materials of hardship. Corncob dolls, rag dolls, button toys, carved scraps of wood, snow figures, shadow animals on walls, stories built around stove glow and blanket forts. In a cabin sealed by weather, a child might find entertainment in tracing frost patterns on glass or naming the shapes of smoke stains overhead. Modern toy departments would be horrified by the simplicity. The children, when not cold or hungry, could be quite inventive anyway. The woman rises and crosses to the bed near the wall. She tucks the quilt tighter around the child, then slides one hand under the blanket to check the feet. Cold. Not dangerously cold, but cold enough. She rubs them briskly through wool socks. The child squirms, half laughing, half complaining. The sound is soft, and everyone else remains still. In a one-room cabin, privacy is a luxury, but tenderness is not. Another child, smaller perhaps, sleeps through all of it with the astonishing commitment of the very young. Mouth slightly open, hair stuck to the forehead, one arm flung above the head like a tiny explorer claiming the pillow. The storm can rattle the door, bury the yard, frighten the horse, and summon coyotes from the dark, but this child has found a warm hollow under the quilts and refuses to participate in history for the moment. Good for them. Observers of frontier families have debated how children remembered such winters later in life. Were blizzard nights fixed in memory as fear, adventure, hardship, closeness, or simply ordinary weather magnified by age? One memoir might recall terror at the sound of wolves or wind. Another might remember the delicious privilege of sleeping close to siblings under a mountain of quilts. Another might remember hunger, chores, smoke, or the smell of wet mittens drying near the stove. Childhood memory is not a ledger. It keeps odd things. A lamp flame, a mother's hand, a dog stealing warmth, a biscuit softened in coffee. The child asks a question too quietly for you to hear. The answer comes no, not morning yet. This is disappointing news, but not surprising. The longest part of a blizzard night is the part after you have already woken once and discovered that darkness still has plenty of work left to do. The child turns toward the room, blinking at the stove glow. The hens rustle under their cloth. One clucks in its sleep. This helps. Chickens are poor guardians, but excellent evidence that the world remains absurdly normal in places. A story begins, whispered from the chair. Not a grand story. Nothing too exciting. Exciting is not wanted. Perhaps it is about a neighbour's cow that wandered into the wrong yard. Perhaps it is about a train delayed by snow but arriving with oranges packed in straw. A memory bright enough to taste. Perhaps it is a family tale brought from another state, another country, another winter. The rhythm matters more than plot. Words soften the wind. Familiar voices make the cabin larger on the inside. You listen too, drifting. The story moves slowly. A child's breathing steadies. The stove ticks. Snow brushes the door again, but now the sound is tucked behind the whispering voice. The older child asks one more question. Will the schoolhouse be closed if the snow is high? That produces a small smile in the dark. Some worries are universal. Survival, fuel, livestock, and the thrilling possibility of no lessons tomorrow. Very human, very reasonable. Schooling in Wyoming during the 1870s varied widely by place, settlement, family resources, and distance. Some children attended small local schools when available. Others learned at home, irregularly, around weather and work. A blizzard could interrupt lessons for days, but it might also become a lesson itself. How to bank a fire, how to read drift, how to listen to animals, how to keep close to the rope if you must walk to the barn. These were not written neatly on a slate, yet they were learned. The woman finishes rubbing the child's feet and adds another folded cloth near them for warmth. The child sinks lower beneath the quilts. Only the top of the head shows now. The voice near the stove fades to silence because the story has done its work. The room settles again into layered breathing. You feel sleep approach more gently this time. The children have changed the night. Their fear has made the adults careful. Their questions have made the storm nameable. Their small warmth under the quilts has made the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like a home, imperfect, smoky, cramped, and alive. Outside, the Wyoming blizzard keeps moving across the plains, covering tracks, rounding fence posts, hiding distance. Inside, the children sleep under heavy quilts, learning without knowing it how people endure a night that is too large for them, one soft breath at a time. Loneliness does not enter the cabin all at once. It seeps in during the quiet after the children sleep. When the story has ended, the stove has settled, and even the dog seems convinced that no further bacon will appear. The storm is still there, pressing at the door, softening the window, dragging its long breath over the roof. Yet now, with the room calmer, you begin to feel the distance around the cabin more clearly. Not just the distance to the corral, not just the distance to the railroad, the distance to another human voice outside these walls. In daylight, a claim on the Wyoming plains can feel like a promise. Land stretching wide under a sky so large it makes ambition seem reasonable. Room for cattle, crops if the season allows, a cabin, a shed, a future. A person might stand at the doorway and imagine fences, a garden, a better roof, more animals, perhaps a second room one day, which would be a miracle worthy of applause. At night in a blizzard, as the same land feels less like promise and more like exposure. The homestead, the ranch cabin, the line shack, the dugout, each becomes an island. The neighbours who seemed merely distant yesterday may as well be across an ocean tonight. The trail between you and them has disappeared. Their lamp, if it burns, cannot be seen. Their voices cannot cross the wind. If trouble comes, help will not arrive quickly unless it was already inside the room. A clear historical fact rests beneath that loneliness. The Homestead Act of 1862 encouraged settlement across the West by offering land to those who met residency and improvement requirements. But in places like Wyoming, aridity, isolation, harsh winters, and distance from markets made successful homesteading difficult. The legal idea of land ownership could look simple on paper. The lived reality involved weather, labour, debt, supplies, animals, and the ability to remain hopeful when the nearest neighbour was too far away to hear you shout. You lie under the quilts and think of the paper claim filed somewhere, the boundaries measured or guessed, the confidence of signatures and records. Then you look at the frosted window and understand how thin paper can feel against weather. A claim may say the land is yours. The blizzard does not appear to have received the document. The cabin's possessions gather meaning in the darkness. The stove, the table, the bed, the flour barrel, the patched quilts, the shovel by the door, the rope that might lead to the barn, the few books or newspapers on a shelf, the trunk holding clothing, letters, perhaps a photograph from another life. Each object is more than useful. Each one says that someone intends to stay. That intention can be a comfort. It can also be heavy. You imagine the person who built this room, placing one log on another while mosquitoes rose in summer and frost came early in autumn. Perhaps he thought the cabin would be temporary. Perhaps she thought it would do until something better could be built. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when weather, debt, children, animals, and fatigue begin voting together. The roof that was meant for one season survives 3. The chinking patched in haste becomes the wall you sleep beside. The rough bed becomes the family bed. The claim becomes home because leaving would be harder than staying. A curious note from frontier life is that some settlers named claims cabins, springs, hills, or lonely landmarks with private jokes or homesick references. A bleak ridge might be called Comfort Hill. A muddy patch might be named Paradise Flat. A cabin with one smoky room might receive a grand name borrowed from a place back east or across the ocean. Humans do this often. We give a hard place a gentle name, and then try to make the name come true. It is either poetry or stubbornness, usually both. The wind drops for several seconds. The silence that follows feels enormous. Without the wind, the cabin does not feel safer at first. It feels exposed, as if the storm has paused to listen back. You hear the tiny movements that were hidden before. Ash settling in the stove. A child breathing. A horse faintly shifting outside. The cloth over the hens moving with some small feathered adjustment. Your own heartbeat. Slow but present beneath the bedding. Then the wind returned, and strangely, you are relieved. At least the noise has a shape. Isolation changes sound, thought, and sleep. When there are many people nearby, the mind can loosen its watch. Someone else is awake. Someone else might notice danger. In a lonely cabin, every sleeper depends on the same few ears. A person may wake repeatedly, not from a specific sound, but from the knowledge that no larger community surrounds them. The cabin is the watchtower, hospital, kitchen, nursery, barn office, weather station, and chapel of complaint all at once. Scholars have long discussed whether loneliness on the frontier has been exaggerated by later myth-making or understated because many settlers were accustomed to rural life and accepted distance as ordinary. Both interpretations have truth in them. Some people found space freeing, others found it crushing. Some families formed strong neighbour networks despite miles between homes. Others endured weeks where the only visitors were weather, animals, and the occasional regrettable mouse. Isolation was not one feeling. It was a climate of the mind. You turn under the blankets and feel the cold wall through the bedding. It reminds you that the cabin has edges. Beyond them lies nothing visible. The thought is not dramatic, not panic, just a slow awareness that you are small in a wide place. The room smells of smoke, coffee, damp wool, and sleeping animals. Those smells, so ordinary, become anchors. They tell you that life continues in here, not beautifully, perhaps, not cleanly, but steadily. On a shelf, perhaps, there is a Bible, an almanac, a school book, a few letters tied with string, or a newspaper already read many times and then used for drafts when news has served its first purpose. Written words matter in lonely places. They bring other voices into the room. A letter from family might be opened and reread until the folds soften. A newspaper from weeks ago might still make the outside world feel connected to this one, even if the politics are stale and the advertisements promise goods no one can afford. You remember the railroad again, carrying newspapers and letters. You remember travellers caught between shelters, women keeping the night together, children learning the storm by whispers. Now those memories gather into a larger feeling. Every person in this territory is connected by need, yet separated by miles of weather and land. The frontier is not empty, it is scattered. That scattering shapes sleep. You may fall asleep thinking of someone else awake in another cabin, another dugout, another ranch house, also listening to a door buried by snow. They may be thinking of you without knowing your name. This is a strange comfort. Loneliness can be shared invisibly. Across the storm, many small rooms hold many quiet lives, each believing itself alone, each making the same calculations of fire, food, and mourning. The stove glow dims and brightens as a coal breaks open. The person in the chair stirs but does not rise. The fire is still enough. The children remain asleep. The dog presses more firmly against your feet, perhaps chasing dreams, perhaps absorbing the entire emotional burden of the household and converting it into snoring. You let your eyes close. The claim, the cabin, the wide land, the vanished neighbours all drift outward. You do not solve loneliness. You outlast it, hour by hour, with chores, jokes, food, care, animals, letters, and sleep when sleep is possible. Tonight, the blizzard makes the world feel very far away, but under the quilts, with the stove still alive and the room breathing round you, the distance becomes softer. The cabin is lonely. It is also full, and somewhere between those two truths, you begin to rest. By now, the cabin has entered the hour when small discomforts become large enough to have names. A cough in the corner is no longer only a cough, it is watched. A cold foot is not simply cold, it is rubbed, wrapped, and quietly judged. A headache near the stove may be from smoke, weariness, hunger, worry, or the deep unfairness of being alive in a room where chickens are sleeping better than several people. The blizzard keeps pressing against the walls, but inside, attention turns toward bodies. Frontier nights make everyone a little medical. You lie beneath the quilts, half awake, while the woman near the stove reaches for a cloth bundle, a tin, perhaps a small bottle kept on a shelf above children's hands. The lamp is turned up just enough to show the work. Its glow spreads over the table, catching on a spoon, a chipped cup, a folded rag, and the rough knuckles of hands that know how to do what can be done. Not everything can be cured, that is understood, but much can be eased. The child who coughed earlier stirs again. The sound is dry, small, and tired. The woman warms little water, not too much, because water is still a resource and the door still has snow waiting beyond it. She adds something to the cup. Perhaps tea if there is any, perhaps molasses, perhaps nothing more than warmth and patience. The child drinks, makes a face, and is told softly that it will help. Whether it helps the throat, the nerves, or the grown-ups is not fully clear. Very often, a remedy treats everyone in the room. A dependable piece of 19th century household life belongs here before doctors were easily available in remote western settlements. Families relied heavily on home nursing, patent medicines, herbal knowledge, neighbourly advice, and practical care such as warmth, rest, fluids, poultices, and observation. In a scattered territory like Wyoming, distance and weather could make professional help impossible during a storm. The home became the sick room, pharmacy, waiting room, and sometimes the entire hospital, which is quite a lot of responsibility for one drafty cabin. Someone warms a brick near the stove and wraps it carefully in cloth. This time it's not only for cold feet, but for comfort against a chilled body. The wrapped brick is tested against the wrist before it is placed beneath a blanket. Too hot, and it burns. Too cool, and it becomes just another disappointing rock. The right heat is a skill. So much of survival is skill disguised as common sense. A small tin of salve appears. It may smell of camphor, lard, herbs, or something medicinal enough to convince the nose that healing is underway. A chest may be rubbed. A cracked hand may be greased. Chapped lips may be touched with a fingertip. The cabin smells briefly sharper, cleaner, almost like a shop shelf from town has opened in the smoky room. Here is one of those odd household details that seems both charming and alarming from a modern bed. Mustard plasters were commonly used for chest congestion, aches, and other complaints, made with mustard powder mixed into a paste and applied with cloth. They could warm the skin fiercely, sometimes too fiercely, and had to be watched. A remedy that can help and also irritate you into a new problem feels very much like the 19th century being honest about itself. The child sees the mustard cloth and becomes suddenly healthier in spirit, which is understandable. The woman smiles, just a little, and makes the preparation milder. No one needs extra drama tonight. The blizzard has already subscribed to that service. You watch from your bedding as the cloth is folded, warmed, and placed with care. The child is told to say if it stings too much. The child nods with the grave expression of someone entrusted with medical authority. For a few moments, all listening narrows to that one small body. The storm can roar, the roof can creak, the world can vanish beyond the window, but here, under the quilt, a child's breathing matters most. Across the room, another person rubs their hands before the stove. The skin is red and rough, knuckles split from cold and work. Cold weather does not only threaten in grand ways, it cracks, dries, stiffens, and wears people down by inches. A person can survive the night and still wake with hands too sore for ordinary tasks. Grease, cloth wraps, warmed stones, and the careful removal of wet socks become a kind of quiet medicine. There may be a bottle of patent remedy in the cabin, brought by wagon or rail, its label making confident promises in decorative type. It might claim to calm nerves, cure coughs, settle stomachs, strengthen the blood, or improve almost everything except the moral quality of the rooster. Some patent medicines did contain useful ingredients. Some contained alcohol, opiates, or other substances that made a person feel improved while the problem continued reading quietly in the corner. People bought them because choices were limited and hope is very marketable. Medical historians still debate how to weigh frontier self-care. Was it mainly dangerous guesswork, practical adaptation, inherited folk knowledge, or a mixture shaped by distance, gender, class, and access to doctors? In this room, the answer feels less like a category and more like a set of hands. Someone knows how to warm a brick without burning skin. Someone knows when a cough sounds ordinary and when it sounds wrong. Someone knows which neighbour once recommended onion syrup, which sounds suspicious until you remember that no one here asked for a glamorous pharmacy. Onion syrup? Yes. Honey if available. Vinegar. Herbs. Hot tea. Whiskey in some households, though not always wisely. Turpentine and harsher remedies sometimes appeared too, with results that deserve caution rather than romance. The past was resourceful, but not automatically gentle. It is worth remembering that not every old cure was a secret treasure. Some were just old mistakes wearing confidence. Still, many comforts were sound: warmth, dry clothes, rest, food, clean water when possible, keeping smoke from choking the room, watching the sick, preventing chilled feet. These do not sound dramatic because they are the foundation. They are also exactly the things a blizzard makes difficult. The stove is fed again with a small piece of fuel. The watcher hesitates before choosing it, because fuel remains precious. Yet illness changes the arithmetic. A colder room may save wood and cost health. A warmer room may spend fuel and buy sleep. The decision is made in favour of warmth, at least for now. The iron door closes, and a faint pulse of heat spreads outward. You breathe in the mingled scent of mustard, smoke, wool, coffee, damp feathers, and warm cloth. It is not a clean smell. It is cared for smell. The difference matters. Cleanliness may have to wait for better weather. Care cannot. The child's coughing eases. Perhaps from the drink, perhaps from the cloth, perhaps from being noticed. The woman checks the skin, removes the plaster before it bites too much, and wraps the child again. A quiet murmur passes between them. The child sinks back into sleep. The room softens. Someone places another warmed stone near the bed. Someone folds a damp cloth away from the cold wall. Someone checks that the dog has not stolen the entire lower half of the blanket, which of course it has attempted. The dog blinks, innocent as a magistrate, and refuses to explain. You settle deeper beneath the quilts, aware now that comfort is not one thing. It is 1,000 small interventions against the cold. A cup lifted, a brick wrapped, a hand rubbed, a cough heard, a draught blocked, a fire tended, a child reassured, a sore knuckle greased. A body moved closer to warmth. Outside, the storm continues with its huge indifferent patience. Inside, the remedies are small, imperfect, sometimes strange, sometimes wise, but they are human. And in the slow red glow of the stove, with the bitter scent of mustard fading into smoke, you feel the cabin hold together for one more hour. Not because the blizzard has weakened, but because care has answered it in every small way it can. The hardest hour is the one that feels nearest to morning but refuses to become it. You wake into it without knowing when you slept. There is no clean edge between dream and cabin, only a slow return to the weight of quilts, the smell of smoke, and the sound of wind moving with less fury but more persistence. The stove has burned lower. The room is dim again, not fully dark, not truly light. A strange greyness presses against the window, though whether it comes from moonlight, snowlight, or the first faint approach of dawn is impossible to tell. Your body wants the answer to be dawn. The room offers no guarantee. The child who coughed is sleeping now, tucked deeply beneath bedding. The woman near the stove has drifted in the chair, chin lowered, blanket drawn around her. Her hands are folded but not loosely. Even asleep, they look ready to work. The dog remains at your feet, warm and heavy, claiming credit for the survival of the household. The hens are quiet beneath their cloth. The horse outside has not stamped for some time, which may be good, or may only mean the wind hides it. You listen. Nothing urgent. Then everything. That is how this hour works. It magnifies absence. If the horse is quiet, you wonder why. If the wind eases, you wonder what it is preparing. If the stove ticks less often, you wonder whether the coals have fallen too low. You lie still because moving would let cold into the bedding. Yet your mind keeps rising and crossing the room without you. The long stretch before dawn had real importance in winter households. In the 19th century, people without reliable clocks, bright artificial light, or automatic heat often measured night by fire, chores, animal sounds, hunger, and changes in weather rather than by exact time. In a storm, those signals blurred. A person might wake thinking morning was close, only to discover hours of darkness still remained. The mind, deeply offended, would then file a complaint with the ceiling. The stove gives a faint metallic sound. You wait for another. It comes late. Someone opens their eyes near the chair. Perhaps the same watcher. Perhaps someone else. The cabin has been passing responsibility from body to body without announcing it. The person rises slowly, as if joints have frozen in the shape of sleep. A blanket slips from one shoulder. The figure crosses to the stove and opens the door with the iron tool. The glow inside is small but alive. A breath you did not know you were holding leaves you. Fuel is added, only a little, enough to wake the coals. The new piece catches after a patient pause, then brightens. The room receives the light with gratitude. Shadows soften. The frost on the window gleams. The person closes the stove door and stands there with both hands extended toward the heat. No one speaks. Words would be too awake. Outside. The wind no longer roars as it did earlier. It has become lower, steadier, sliding across the cabin with a grainy hiss. Snow still moves. You can hear it against the door, the dry scrape of particles driven along packed drift. The sound is small enough to seem harmless, yet by now you know how small things gather. A drift is only 1,000 little decisions made by wind. A curious old habit from households in cold places comes to mind. People sometimes try to guess the time before dawn by the behaviour of the fire, the stars if visible, roosters, animals, or the feel of the air. Indoors during a blizzard, most of those clues are useless. The rooster, if present, may wisely remain silent because even poultry can recognize poor conditions. A rooster crowing inside a snow-sealed cabin would not be a clock. It would be an insult. You almost smile. Then the grey light at the window changes, or seems to. Your eyes search the frost. The glass is too clouded to show much, but the upper corner appears less black than before. Perhaps dawn is near. Perhaps snow reflects the stove glow back at you. Perhaps your sleepy mind is inventing hope because it has become tired of managing uncertainty. This is the hour when anxiety grows strange and soft around the edges. Not sharp fear, not panic, more like a fog inside the chest. You think of the animals. You think of the door. You think of the woodpile outside, the path to the shed, the railroad tracks miles away, the travellers wrapped in robes, the line camp, the dugout roof, the children under quilts, the woman's hands, the mustard scent fading from the room. Everything from the night returns at once, no longer in order. Fatigue makes time circular. You're no longer certain whether the door was cleared hours ago or moments ago. You remember the stove being fed, and then being fed again, and then again. You remember coffee, but not finishing it. You remember coyotes, perhaps real, perhaps dreamt. You remember the dog stealing warmth with legal confidence. The whole night has become a long, dim corridor of repeated tasks. Students of Western settlement history continue to examine whether personal diaries and later reminiscences capture the emotional reality of such nights, or whether the repetitive nature of domestic survival made many experiences vanish from the record. People might write about the big storm, the lost animal, the blocked road, the delayed train. They might not write. Woke 6 times to listen to the stove and wonder if dawn would ever arrive. Yet that unwritten line may be closer to the heart of the experience than any grand adventure. The person by the stove adds water to the kettle. The sound is soft, a muted pour. Steam begins to rise after a while. Perhaps coffee will be made again when morning is certain. Not yet. The room is still balancing between night and day, and no one wants to declare too early. Dawn on the plains should be a simple event, but in a blizzard it arrives like a rumour. Your eyelids lower, then open. The room blurs. The stove glow becomes a small red sun behind iron. The frosted window becomes a pale moon. The dog's breathing becomes a bellows. The wind becomes ocean. For a moment you are back in the dugout, earth over your head, then on the train, hearing wheels in snow, then in the coach, knees under a buffalo robe, then here again, under quilts, nose cold, feet warm, mind floating between shelters. This is not restful sleep, it is survival sleep. It comes in shallow pools. You step into one, then wake at the edge. You step into another, then a sound pulls you back. Yet even shallow sleep matters. It lets the body soften. It lets fear loosen. It lets the long night pass in pieces too small to defeat you all at once. The child coughs once lightly, then settles. The woman in the chair opens her eyes at the sound, waits, then closes them again. The stove ticks more steadily now. Heat returns by degrees. The room seems to breathe easier. The frost on the window glows a little brighter. This time, perhaps, it is truly morning beginning somewhere behind the storm. You do not rise yet. No one does. After so many hours of work, worry, and listening, the cabin hesitates before accepting the day. The world outside may still be white and dangerous. The door may need digging again. The animals may need attention. Fuel must be found. Food must be warmed. Snow must be read like a message left overnight by a difficult neighbour. But for one more minute you remain under the quilts. The blizzard has not ended. Dawn has not fully arrived. And in that suspended grey hour, with the stove slowly waking and the room full of tired breathing, you let yourself float near sleep, held between darkness and morning, waiting for the white world to reveal what it has done. The wind drops so gradually that no one trusts it at first. It does not stop with a dramatic sigh or a final shove against the wall. It simply becomes less present. The roof no longer trembles every few breaths. The fine hiss at the door thins. The stovepipe quiets. The cabin, which has spent the night answering the storm, seems unsure what to do with the sudden space left behind. You open your eyes to a pale room. Morning has arrived, though not brightly. The window is still furred with frost and snow is packed high against its lower half, but the light beyond it has changed from grey uncertainty to a muted white glow. It fills the cabin softly, touching the quilts, the chair, the table, the stove, the cloth-covered crate of hens, and the dog who is still sleeping as if personally responsible for inventing rest. No one rises quickly. After a blizzard night, morning is not a cheerful entrance. It is an inspection. Everyone waits a moment, listening to the new silence, wondering what the storm has left behind. The stove is fed first. Of course it is. The iron door opens, the coals are coaxed, a small flame returns. Only then does the room begin to move. Blankets slide, boots are pulled on. A child sits up with hair flattened on one side and wide eyes aimed toward the window. The woman near the chair rubs her face and looks older in the morning light than she did in the red glow of night. Sleep has not erased the work. It has merely paused it. The dog finally wakes, stretches with outrageous satisfaction, and steps on someone's blanket while pretending this is necessary household management. A useful truth about plains blizzards belongs to this morning after the wind eased. The danger was not always over. Deep drifts could block doors, bury paths, trap or scatter livestock, hide hazards, and make travel difficult or impossible for hours or days. The storm's violence might pass, but its rearrangement of the world remained. Snow was not just weather after it fell. It became terrain. You stand, stiff and blinking, and feel how your body remembers the night. Shoulders tight, knees reluctant, feet grateful but suspicious. Your nose, faithful little weather station, reports that the cabin is still cold near the door. The rolled blanket at the threshold is rimmed with frost. The shovel waits beside it like a person who knows they're about to be asked for too much. The door latch lifts. This time. The door opens more than before, but only after a shove. Snow collapses inward in a soft, powdery slide. Brightness pours through the gap. Everyone narrows their eyes. The outside world, after so many hours of darkness and imagination, looks both familiar and impossible. The yard is vanished. In its place lies a sculpted field of white, rising in smooth waves against the cabin wall, dipping where the wind scoured the ground, climbing again near the corral fence. The path to the shed is gone. The woodpile is a rounded lump. Fence rails appear and disappear like thoughts half remembered. The corral gate is outlined only by a dark bar where snow has not fully covered it. Beyond that, the land stretches pale and empty. The horizon softened until sky and ground seem made from the same cold cloth. It is beautiful. This is inconvenient because beautiful things should not require immediate digging. A small frontier oddity appears in the way people read this new world. Experienced residents looked for clues in drift shapes, exposed grass, animal tracks, fence tops, smoke direction, and the hardness of packed snow. A drift could show where the wind curled around a wall. A hollow could mark a dangerous soft place. A line of tracks could tell whether an animal had moved, struggled, or found shelter. The snow was not blank to someone who knew how to read it. It was a report written overnight in very pale ink. The first task is the doorway. Snow is shoveled outward, then sideways, then trampled into a rough step. The air bites your face at once. It is cleaner than anything inside the cabin, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Every breath sends vapour forward in a white plume. The cold smells of iron, snow, and distant sage buried somewhere under the drifts. You step outside carefully, and the snow takes your boot nearly to the knee in one place, then barely covers the sole in another. The wind has carved the yard into tricks. You move slowly, feeling for the packed layer beneath, behind you. The cabin looks smaller from outside, half banked in snow, smoke rising from the stovepipe in a thin grey column. That smoke is a relief. It says the room is alive. The horse is the next concern. A figure moves toward the shed with the rope line in hand. Though the worst of the whiteout has passed, the rope is still useful because morning light does not guarantee safe footing. You follow in imagination. Boots plunging, snow squeaking, breath short. The shed door is rimmed with drift. Inside, the horse turns its head, alive, restless, offended, and perhaps hungry enough to forgive everyone eventually. Frost clings to its whiskers. Hay is scattered. One hoof has packed the floor hard where it stamped in the night. A hand rests on the horse's neck. Warmth under hair, life under weather. A simple contact says more than any speech. The chickens are carried back later only if the coop can be reached and made safe. For now, they remain inside, clucking under their cloth with the tone of ladies who have endured scandal and expect compensation. The dog bounds briefly into the snow, sinks, looks betrayed by physics, and returns to the doorway with all former enthusiasm revised. You look for tracks, near the corral. Hoof marks show where the horse shifted. Farther out, faint lines may belong to a rabbit, or to wind dragging grass tips across crust. A coyote trail appears along a drifted fence, neat prints in a slanting row, already softening in the morning light. The calls from the night were real, then, or perhaps other coyotes passed later. The land keeps its own schedule. Historians continue to discuss how frontier communities turned storms into stories afterward, deciding which losses, rescues, and small survivals became memorable. A morning like this could become a family tale if something unusual happened, or vanish into routine if everyone lived. The animals survived, and the stove kept burning. That is one of history's quiet unfairnesses. Success often leaves fewer records than disaster. A well-tended fire, a cleared door, a horse found safe, a child's cough eased. These may leave no headline at all. Back inside, breakfast begins without ceremony. Coffee is warmed. Beans may return. Biscuits are softened. The stove is fed more confidently now that the woodpile can perhaps be reached. Snow brought in on boots melts into dark patches near the threshold. Someone sweeps. Someone shakes a blanket. Someone checks the child's forehead. The woman who held the night together now holds a cup in both hands and drinks slowly, eyes half closed. The cabin smells different in morning. Smoke still lingers, but the air carries a fresher edge from the opened door. The bedding smells of sleep. The dog smells of snow and triumph, despite retreating almost immediately. The hens smell like hens, which is not improved by daylight. You stand near the window and scrape a small clear patch in the frost with a fingernail. Through it, Wyoming lies white and still beneath a softened sky. This storm has moved on or is resting beyond the horizon. The world is not safe exactly. It is simply visible again. And visibility is a kind of mercy. You can see the shed. You can see the fence. You can see the smoke rising straight for a moment before bending gently away. You can see the work waiting in every direction. Digging, feeding, drying, counting, repairing, checking. Perhaps walking to a neighbour when the snow firms enough. The night is over, but the blizzard has left chores like calling cards. Still, you breathe more easily. Because the cabin remains, the stove remains, the children stir, the animals answer, the door opens, and after a night spent listening to Wyoming vanish, morning gives the world back slowly, one drift, one track, one pale breath at a time. By midday, the storm has already begun changing into a story, not because the work is done, it is not. Snow still blocks part of the shed. The path to the woodpile is only a trench with uneven walls. The corral gate opens grudgingly after much scraping and one muttered remark that would not improve any hymn book. The children have been warned not to wander beyond the packed path, which naturally makes the untouched drifts look deeply interesting. The dog has tested the snow again, sunk again, and returned again with the expression of a creature personally betrayed by winter. Yet something has shifted. The blizzard is no longer only happening, it is being remembered. A person at the stove says the wind sounded worse than the storm 2 winters ago. Someone else says no, not worse, just longer. The child insists the coyotes were right outside the wall. The adult says they were farther off. The dog, who was awake for part of it and asleep for the rest, declines to testify. The hens, restored or nearly restored to their proper quarters, offer no useful legal opinion. You stand near the cleared doorway and watch the yard glitter under a high pale sky. The wind has faded to a light movement, enough to lift loose snow from drift edges and send it sparkling across the surface. Smoke rises from the chimney, bends, and thins. Beyond the corral, the open land stretches white and bright, so calm now that the night's noise feels almost invented. But the evidence remains. The drift against the cabin wall reaches higher than your waist. The fence is half buried in one place and scoured bare in another. The trail to the shed curves because the straight path was too deep. The horses' tracks show the anxious stamping of the night. Coyote prints cross the far edge of the yard and vanish toward the low ground. The door bears a frozen crust where snow packed hard and thawed slightly in the first warmth from inside. These details become memory's anchors. A practical historical truth belongs here. 19th century frontier communities often shared storm news through letters, diaries, local newspapers, railroad reports, military records, and oral storytelling, turning weather events into part of local identity. Blizzards were not merely meteorological events. They became family stories, neighbor warnings, newspaper paragraphs, and sometimes regional legends. A storm could be remembered for who got lost, who survived, which train stalled, which cattle drifted, which baby was born, or which dog behaved nobly for approximately 7 minutes before stealing a biscuit. Already the night is being arranged. The blocked door becomes a little higher in the telling. The wind grows deeper voiced. The coyotes move closer. The child's cough becomes either more worrying or less. Depending on who is speaking and whether the listener looks impressed enough, the dog's role expands dangerously. By evening, it may have guarded the entire household from wolves, thieves, and poor morale, despite spending most of the night on your feet. This is how stories work. They do not always lie. They shape. A curious feature of Western storm lore is how quickly ordinary weather could become attached to colourful names, local landmarks, or moral lessons. One blizzard might be remembered as the one that buried the schoolhouse door, another as the night the preacher slept in the stable, another as the storm when a cow appeared on the roof of a low shed after drifting snow made a ramp. Whether every detail survived perfectly is less important than what the story taught tie the rope before you need it. Bring fuel inside early, trust a good horse, never mock the weather before supper, and maybe do not let the dog write the official account. You step farther outside. Snow squeaks beneath your boots. The cold air is clean enough to make the cabin smell seem far behind you, though smoke clings to your coat. In the distance, there may be another cabin, unseen but imagined. Perhaps someone there is also digging out, also retelling the night, also deciding whether their drift was taller than yours. Human beings can turn even hardship into mild competition. It is not our finest trait, but it is reliable. If a newspaper man hears of this storm, he may write it with a certain flourish. The plains swept by fierce winds, families shut in, stock endangered, trains delayed, brave efforts made, roads impassable. Such phrases fit neatly into columns and travel well. What they cannot fully hold is the stove ticking at 3 a.m, the child's cold feet, the smell of mustard fading into smoke, the woman resting her eyes for 1 minute, the taste of beans eaten because they were warm, the dog pressing against your ankles like a living brick. Those things belong to private memory. The larger world prefers events. The cabin remembers textures. Students of frontier memory continue to debate how reliable later accounts of blizzards can be, especially when stories pass through families before being written down. Some recollections preserve vivid truth, others gather exaggeration, pride, humour, fear, or borrowed details from neighbouring tales. Yet even imperfect stories reveal what people cared about. They show how communities made sense of danger, how they praised endurance, how they warned the young, and how they turned survival into something that could be shared beside a stove. By afternoon, if the weather holds, a neighbour may arrive. You imagine the figure appearing first as a dark mark on the white land, moving slowly along a drift-packed route, perhaps on horseback, perhaps on foot with snowshoes or simply high boots and stubbornness. The dog notices before anyone else and barks with heroic outrage, as though visitors were not invented until this moment. The door opens, cold air enters, then a voice. That voice changes the cabin. After a night of isolation, another human greeting feels almost extravagant. News is exchanged at once. Are the animals safe? Did the roof hold? Is the road open? Any word from the station? How deep near your place did you hear the coyotes? Did the children sleep? Is there coffee? There is always room in the story for coffee. The visitor brings news, or rumour dressed as news. A wagon stuck near the low crossing. A train delayed near Laramie or Rawlins. A family whose barn door drifted shut. Cattle pushed toward a creek bottom. Telegraph trouble along the line. Maybe all true. Maybe partly true. Maybe true enough until corrected. In scattered country, information travels with weather on its boots. Inside, the stove is fed for company. Cups appear. The beans return, as beans often do in history with impressive persistence. The visitor sits near the warmth, snow melting from trouser cuffs, cheeks red from cold. The night becomes talk, not because it was easy, but because speaking it aloud gives it edges. A storm that can be told is already less powerful than a storm that is still only roaring outside the wall. You listen as each person adds a piece. The woman mentions the child's cough but says it eased. Someone recalls clearing the door in the dark. The child insists again that the coyotes were nearly on the roof. The visitor laughs and says coyotes know better than to waste a good roof. The dog receives credit for growling, which is accepted as sufficient heroism by all involved, especially the dog. The open land outside keeps shining. It is hard to reconcile the bright afternoon with the dark night. That contrast is part of why blizzards live so strongly in memory. Weather can transform a place, terrify it, bury it, and then leave it glittering as if nothing personal happened. The human mind objects to that, so it tells the story. It says, "No, something happened here. We were awake. We listened. We dug. We tended the fire. We kept the children warm. We fed the animals. We endured." As evening approaches again, the tale has already softened at the edges. Fear becomes humour. Irritation becomes wisdom. Exhaustion becomes a line someone repeats with a smile. The night is not forgotten. But it is changed. It becomes part of the household store like flour, salt, coffee, and fuel. Something kept for later use. And when the next storm gathers, as it will, someone will remember this one. Someone will say to bring in more wood. Someone will check the shovel inside the door. Someone will tie the rope sooner. Someone will make sure the children's socks are dry. Someone will save the story of the dog, though perhaps with responsible editing. You stand at the threshold as the light begins to fade again over the wide white land. Behind you, the cabin is warmer than it was in the morning. Ahead, the snow holds tracks leading outward and back. The blizzard has left its marks, but so have you. Not grand marks, not monuments, just paths, smoke, hoofprints, shovel cuts, laughter, and a story beginning to settle into memory. Evening returns, but this time it comes softly. The storm has moved on beyond the wide white plain, leaving the cabin inside a silence that feels almost unfamiliar. All day, the household has worked through what the blizzard left behind. Snow has been shoveled from the doorway and tramped into paths. The horse has been fed, rubbed down, and forgiven for its anxious stamping. The hens have been returned to more suitable quarters, though not without comment from everyone involved. The dog has inspected every path, claimed every footprint, and behaved as if the whole recovery effort depended on its supervision. Now the light begins to fade again. The sky outside is pale lavender near the horizon, deepening into cold blue overhead. No snow falls. No wall of white moves across the yard. The fence posts stand half buried but visible. The corral lies quiet. Smoke rises from the cabin chimney, steady and thin, then bends gently in the evening air. The land looks peaceful in that deceptive winter way, as if it has not spent the last night trying to erase every human arrangement within reach. You stand at the threshold for a moment before going in. The cold touches your cheeks, but it is no longer the fierce, searching cold of the blizzard. It is clean, open, and still. The snow reflects the last light, glowing faintly over the paths, drifts, and hoofprints. In the distance, the plains stretch without movement. Somewhere far beyond sight, there may be a train moving again, a telegraph wire humming, a traveller reaching a station, a neighbour telling the same storm with different measurements. But here, the day has narrowed back to one cabin, one stove, one room holding its heat. A settled historical truth belongs to this final quiet by the late 1870s. Wyoming remained a territory shaped by harsh climate, scattered settlement, railroad towns, military posts, cattle work, indigenous displacement, and the daily labour of people trying to build lives in a demanding landscape. The romantic image of the West often focuses on movement, conquest, and open distance. Yet so much of life here depended on staying still through weather, waiting out storms, keeping fires alive, and making a room survivable enough for sleep. You step inside. The cabin smells different tonight. Still smoky, of course. Smoke has signed a long-term lease on the walls and shows no intention of leaving. But there is also the smell of drying wool, warmed beans, swept ash, fresh split wood brought in after the path was cleared, and the faint, clean edge of snow tracked near the doorway. The room has been straightened after the long night, quilts shaken, cups wiped, the shovel set back inside where no one will forget it again. The rolled blanket waits near the threshold, not needed yet, but ready. The stove burns more confidently now. The fuel pile is larger than it was during the darkest hours, and that alone changes the mood of the room. Heat spreads with less anxiety. The iron ticks, but no one listens as sharply. The kettle hums. The lamp gives a low golden light. The children sit drowsily near the bed, full of the strange energy that comes after a hard day indoors and out, when the body is tired but the mind still wants to retell everything. One child repeats the story of the blocked door. Another insists the coyotes were close enough to smell the chickens. The dog, hearing the word chickens, lifts its head. This is not helpful, but it is consistent. A small, curious winter custom comes to mind after severe storms. Some families treated the first calmer evening almost like a quiet household holiday. Not formally, not with ceremony, but with extra stories, a warmer drink, a saved sweet if there was one, or simply permission to sit longer by the stove. Surviving ordinary danger often created ordinary celebration. No banners, no speeches, just coffee, warmth, and someone saying, "Well, that was a night." Someone does say it. The phrase settles into the room with gentle satisfaction. You sit near the stove and stretch your hands toward the heat. Your palms warm first, then your wrists. The same iron sun that ruled the storm now feels less severe, more companionable. It does not have to prove itself every minute. It burns steadily, and the room trusts it. A pot rests nearby, sending up a faint scent of beans and bacon. Biscuits warm near the edge. The coffee is not elegant, but it is hot, dark, and loyal, which may be more useful than elegance in this weather. The bed has been remade into its heavy winter shape. Quilts, wool blankets, buffalo robe, coats within reach. The bedding looks almost too warm now, but you know better than to mock it. Last night taught respect. The cold may be calmer, but it still waits near the wall, along the floor, behind the door. Comfort remains a careful arrangement, not a guarantee. Researchers still differ over how to interpret nights like this in the wider memory of the American frontier. Were they episodes of hardship that later nostalgia softened? Or were they also moments when households created genuine intimacy, skill, humour, and belonging under pressure? The answer, like the cabin itself, has more than one room even when the room is physically only one room. A night can be frightening and tender, miserable and beautiful, exhausting and unforgettable. The frontier was not one feeling, it was a whole weather system of feelings. You remember everything now in layers. The door blocked with snow, the stove burning low, the bed warming slowly around your body, the dog at your feet, the horse stamping in the dark, the hens under cloth, the distant idea of the railroad, the imagined dugout, earth-scented and low, the beans, coffee, fuel, cough remedies, children's whispers, and the grey hour before dawn when time seemed to circle endlessly. Each detail has softened since morning. The fear has loosened. The discomfort has become story. The cold has become something you can speak about from the warmer side of it. Outside, the last colour leaves the snow. The yard turns blue, then silver, then a gentle grey. A few stars appear, sharp and quiet above the plains. The sky feels enormous again, but no longer hostile. It simply stretches over the cabin, the corral, the paths, the buried fence, the distant railroad, the silent drifts, and all the other unseen cabins scattered across Wyoming, each holding its own lamp, its own stove, its own remembered storm. Inside, the children grow quiet. One curls beneath a quilt and is asleep almost at once. Another fights sleep bravely for perhaps 30 seconds, then loses with dignity. The dog settles nearby, close enough to be useful, far enough to pretend obedience. The woman near the stove sits with a cup in both hands, not working for the first time in what feels like many hours. Her shoulders lower. The firelight rests on her face. No one rushes. The night does not need to be defeated now. It only needs to be entered gently. You climb beneath the bedding, and this time the cold does not shock you as much. The quilts remember the room's warmth. The robe settles over you with its deep, grounding weight. Your feet find a warm place near the bottom, and the dog, after a moment of apparently solemn deliberation, contributes its body heat again. The stove ticks. The kettle sighs. A faint breath of wind moves around the eaves, but it's only wind now, not the roaring white confusion of last night. You breathe in slowly. Smoke, wool, iron, coffee, snow, and sleep. The cabin has become small again in the best way. Not isolated, enclosed, not trapped, held. The wide land remains outside, but it no longer presses so hard against the heart. You have crossed the blizzard night, not heroically, not cleanly, not without worry, but in the human way, by tending, listening, counting, warming, feeding, remembering, and resting whenever rest could be found. And beneath the wide white Wyoming sky, sleep comes at last not as surrender, but as a quiet reward. The stove burns lower, but gently now. The room breathes around you. The snow outside keeps its pale silence, and you let your eyes close. The last thing you hear is not the storm, but the soft, steady ticking of iron, holding a small circle of warmth in the great cold dark. The night loosens. The cabin settles. Your body sinks deeper into the quilts, and the weight of them becomes less like protection and more like peace. The day has done all it needed to do. The door was opened, the paths were cleared, the animals were found, the children were warmed, the fire was kept, the story was told. Nothing more is asked of you now. Outside, the snow lies smooth beneath the stars. It covers the rough ground, the frozen ruts, the broken stalks, the hard edges of the yard, softening everything that looked sharp by daylight. The fence posts rise quietly from the drifts. The corral is still. The distant plains rest under a pale sky so wide that even worry seems to grow tired beneath it. Inside, breath follows breath. The woman sleeps in her chair for a few moments before waking enough to move toward the bed. The children do not stir. The dog gives one soft sigh and settles its head over its paws. Somewhere near the stove, a coal shifts inward with a tiny sound, and the glow deepens, then steadies. You do not need to follow the tracks outside. You do not need to listen for the railroad. You do not need to measure the fuel again. Not yet. For now, the cabin holds you. The storm has become memory. The cold has become distance. The night has become a wide, quiet blanket laid over Wyoming, over the roof, over the paths, over the sleeping animals, over every small lamp still burning in scattered homes across the plains. Let the wind move far away. Let the snow keep its silence. Let the old stove tick softly in the dark. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You are allowed now to rest. And as the last red light fades behind the iron door, the world grows slower, softer, and more gentle with every breath, until even the memory of the blizzard drifts away like loose snow under starlight. Sweet dreams.